looks like it's kicking off. Great. All right. Welcome back, everybody. So we're restarting the stream now. There was a little bit of a technical difficulty. Everything kind of blew up on the YouTube side. But just for anybody joining now, we're starting from the beginning. Today, we're going to talk about multiplayer networking, Unity 3D development. We're going to talk a little bit about assets in the asset store, a couple things that are still on sale and that got recommended. And we'll talk about just general game development with everybody in chat and the two guys that I've got on the call with me right now. We've got Infinity with Andrew, the Infinity PBR. You'll see all of his stuff linked down in the description below, and Jason's story on here too. So I'm going to pop them both back on, and we're going to kind of kick back off to where we were. I think we'll dive into Doozy UI, which is the last thing that we were going to start talking about before everything blew up, and why you liked it before, why you don't use it now, and really just what it is, because it's really like for people who don't know what Doozy UI is, it's an asset on the asset store that happens to be on sale and was recommended by 3 people in the comments, which was it was the most recommended one out of everything in the comments. I know 3 doesn't sound like a lot, but I know a lot of other people that have recommended it. So I wanted to just make sure that we talk about it really quickly. And yeah, well, I guess let's dive into it, Jason. You just briefly again tell everybody what
Sure.
Doozy UI is and why you would want to use it and all that.
So, like I said, I used to use Doozy 2. It's down to 3. I've tried 3. I don't like 3 for various reasons, but we'll start with what it is. So, if you're new to making games or large apps in Unity, one thing you may never have had to do before is really tackle the multiple scenes and multiple UI components problem. So it's easy enough to sort of make a screen, put some buttons on it, and make a thing work. But if you're dealing with multiple menus and multiple menu tabs and modal dialogues and pop-ups, that's actually not a Unity-specific problem. That's managing UI state. It's a state machine, effectively trying to figure out when does this menu show, when does the other one show, turn this one off, turn this one on, managing the state of the objects. And on top of that, if you want to get fancier with it and have animations where stuff sweeps out and stuff sweeps in and, dialogues pop up and notifications show and all these different things, that's a lot to manage. If you're not familiar with how to architect that system, you would have to make it yourself. You'd have to sort of manage all of the screens, add them some collections, sort through it, activate one, disable the others. It can be an exhausting amount of work to do. And what Doozy does is all of that. And it uses DoTween to do that as well with animations and sort of nice sweeping things like animated drawers, animated icons, all the nice stuff you might want out of a UI framework. So in short, that's what it is. It isn't replacing the Unity UI system. It sits on top of it, and it adds its own button database, screen database, various different things, and then you hook it up in the editor, and it will sort of automatically figure out things like navigating from menu screen to menu screen and all of that. So that's why I usually recommend it, because if you're not inclined to write your own UI system, it pretty much out of the box will really quickly give you the sort of the tools you need to get a nice multi-page complicated UI up and running. What they added in 3, which actually makes it better technically, is they added a graph system. So as well as doing the individual buttons and screens and helping you animate UI elements and all of that, what the new system does is it also includes flow, or flowy, I think they call it. And effectively, it lets you, in the same way that ProBuilder or Playmaker and other graphing tools will do, it'll let you design your UI as a series of flow, and then you can draw the lines there rather than manually hooking up button to button to button to button, which is cool and looks very nice. The reason I don't use it anymore is it's become what's called opinionated as a software tool. That's when a piece of software becomes so all-encompassing that other stuff has to grow around it. And so Playmaker falls into this category too. If you're not inclined to make your own, it's amazing. It just solves a problem, drops in, does the job. If you are inclined to try to do non-standard things with it, or you want to do your own application layer stuff and have your own presentation layer separations and other crazy programmery stuff, it doesn't really give you scope to do that, because they have their own way of like even audio, for example. They've got audio for buttons and things. Now you can write your own code, but it kind of wants you to lean in to the way it uses audio for UI and various things. So it comes down to how much you want it to do for you. And I just got to the point that it feels too opinionated for what I want. I actually use something else called the Devoid Tools UI framework. It's on GitHub for a lot of my projects. But long story short, it is a really, really great asset if you've never built a UI framework yourself and you intend to build anything which has more than like 5 or 6 screens, and you want to manage things like modal dialogues and pause menus and navigating animations and all that stuff. It does so much work for the price. Like, it's whatever it is, it's $30. It's an insane value for what you're getting. Like, even just to be able to visually do animations where stuff bounces and, you know, pops in. Like, if you try to program all of that yourself, you'd have to really know what you're doing. So it's cool. I don't use it anymore, but that doesn't mean I don't recommend it. It just doesn't work for what I need anymore. There you go. Let's do the.
I think that's a good, like, I want to really quickly share the one that you mentioned that you're using, though. You said you're using this one, the Devoid framework example?
That's the one exactly, that's the one I currently use. Obviously, the demo doesn't look as fancy, but I use it very specifically for a particular reason, which is it's a software solution to the problem. And it's effectively, without getting too deep into it, it is a combination of scriptable objects, signal pattern, and a few other little bits that effectively make for a UI base framework that you can build your own stuff on top of. So it does all of just the fundamentals. It does things like your stacking of screens, you're managing your state of screens, handling the layering of multiple layers of UI elements that include particles and animation. So it has just enough for what I need, but doesn't take over the whole sort of project side of it like Doozy does for me. So
got it. Okay, but probably a little bit less just drop right in.
It is heavy. You're going to need to understand what you're doing to use it, because you're basically building your own almost like a mini content provider thing, and you're hooking it up, and then you're effectively using your MVVM setup. So at its base, it follows model view model style architecture. And if you're not familiar with that, it can get a little bit hard to deal with. But if you want to dive into it, it's a cool solution.
That makes sense. Yeah, I recommend Doozy for people who are trying to build UIs and just totally lost on how they're going to build that management, because it is kind of like, I feel like it gives you a lot of the things that you get normally in some like web or even mobile frameworks, right? Like you get the concept of a page and the ability to go back and stuff, right? Like all of the things that are not really normally part of a game, but sometimes you need them.
Yeah,
for a more
even back state. Like, it's not just a back button; it's like a back state. So if you go multiple pages, you can just back your way through it, which is like you don't think about these things when you build your own UI. But if you want to have a state stack, you have to write it yourself normally, you know.
Cool. The other thing that we had talked about in that asset list was the grid set. What was that one called again?
That was Gridbox Prototype Materials. I only mention it because if you've ever made a prototype scene, or if you follow any YouTubers who do make prototype scenes, there's a very good chance you've seen this, because we've all usually land on this ourselves. If you use Pro Builder and you're using it a lot, you can kind of get a bit sick of the Pro Builder textures. It's very much the exact same thing. It's flat and it gets a little bit exhausting. And if you do the vertex painting, it looks okay, but you still don't get all the niceness of like baking your shadows and colors and stuff. There's only so much visual fidelity. Like, if you do this, these are like materials that you just replace the default materials with. You still get your grids, but you get to, like, you know, use the different colors that are pre-selected for you that are quite nice and work together, and then they just sort of look a bit nicer. So they're free. They're just a simple thing. If you just want some basic separation between your walls, your floors, your obstacles, and if you're new to black boxing or white boxing or, you know, gray boxing, whatever you want to go down that category, it's effectively using this is a little tip. Use different colors for different environmental types of things. It's not arbitrary. You would use like 1 equals floor, 1 equals walls, 1 equals obstacles, 1 equals interactable elements. And just as a starting point, it's a really great way to visually represent which elements of my environment are things that are meant to be interacted with, which are enemies, which are whatever. So that's kind of the point. Like, you might use the red one to represent what will be poison or something, and you might use, you know, different ones for different elevations or something. So yeah, there you go. It's a cool free tool. I use it a lot. I customize
Yeah.
it myself now. I like to take the textures and go into Photoshop and tweak them a bit so I don't feel like I'm doing the same as everyone else. But fundamentally, I'm using this kind of structure. It's a good prototype for a prototype material. As funny as that sounds.
Yep, totally agree. Yeah, you can always just go in and change the colors out, but it's definitely good to use something like this. I have a set of my own that I just use that are pretty much based on this. Just
I
went
now do too. Yeah.
like after looking at these again, I think I just used one of these as the basis for the color set that I made myself. That's funny. It's just been a while since I used it. It's really cool
Yeah.
case though. All
Yeah,
right, cool. So
I
I
just
just wanted to
swapped out the fonts and a few other different bits, and I changed some of the lines. Like this uses the, because again, it's one of those like until you start making your own, you don't realize how much goes into making prototype textures. Because if you look at it, one, it has to loop in all directions for starters. That's
Mhm.
one. So you're trying to be careful how much of the boundary borderline stuff you're doing. Secondly, you want to decide how much fidelity per the meter sizes you want to use. So in this case, they're focusing very much on it's a 1 meter squared and then 512 individual portions. And so those little colored lines are fading in opacity to indicate to you at a distance what a meter unit is versus the half or quarter of that. And so you have to decide how much of that you want to do. And do you include diagonal lines? And it's funny how if you're prototyping with an intent to use it correctly, where you're meant to use it to represent scale for things like characters' jump heights and how big should doors be, and if you're actually intending to prototype quote unquote correctly, that's like not a trivial decision to make. You have to decide what your prototype textures look like, and standardizing them will make the rest of your code base easier to work with, or your visual kind of base, I guess. So yeah, it's a big topic, and having someone just have this done for you is quite nice.
Yeah.
I would add to that, if you, I guess when you start adding in other geometry, more bespoke walls or pillars or whatnot, throwing these on that is a great, very quick way to tell whether the textile density is the same between all your different parts. And it's very easy, especially when working with different modelers or perhaps things from the asset store, to suddenly realize, oh, one of these walls or pillars is using a double the density as another, or what's worse, even half the density. Suddenly all these textures that you thought you were going to be able to throw on all look kind of blurry because they're just blown up. So you need to rework things a little bit. So it's a great way to quickly see how your other geometry is working out.
That's a good idea. That's something I hadn't really thought of. I thought of using them for. Normally, I just whine to the artists that it doesn't look right.
That could work too.
Yeah, so there was a mention in chat that the spring sale worth the discount on all these ends on 4/30, so only a couple of days left. So if anybody wants to grab them, make sure that you go check them out and go check out all the other stuff that's on sale too. Let's see. Close that out, and then I don't think there were any other assets, unless there was anything you wanted to talk about, Andrew, asset-wise.
Oh, we talked about so many last week. I'm sure some in the chat will bring up assets that they've been discovering that are exciting, but no, there's so many assets, too many to talk about.
Cool. Yeah, if anything cool comes up, we'll have to check it out. The other thing that I had mentioned that I really wanted to talk about today was the MLAPI stuff and just the multiplayer networking. So there was that announcement, I guess, that the MLAPI stuff was getting released and updated, and there was that boss room demo, and I actually got to check that thing out, and I was showing Jason that a little bit. In fact, why not just show it right here? So I'm just gonna screen share it and show everybody on the stream so everybody knows what it is that I'm talking about. So let's stop this. Where's the screen share button? Stop screen sharing and re-screen share a new Unity window. Love how easily this works. All right, there we go. Now the window is up. You guys can all see it, right? So this is the multiplayer demo that just got released, and you can start a new game, start a network game. Apparently, you can even use the relay server. Didn't know that. And then give yourself a name, hit confirm. Pick a character class, like choose the archer again, because I think this one actually had some abilities that I was able to make fire off. And then it seems to log in, and I haven't tried it multiplayer yet, but I assume that multiple people can just kind of hop right in and join in and start fighting all the goblins and stuff. So this is I mean, it's not like it's the most amazing game ever or anything, but it is pretty cool, and it's I think one of the best multiplayer demos that I've seen from Unity, where it felt really polished. At least I haven't actually dug into the code or anything, so I don't know what it looks like under the hood or how complicated it is. I take that back. I dug in a little bit, and it seemed good so far, but I haven't dug in completely. But I mean, overall, like polish wise, it seems relatively nice and like a good starting point. And I was pretty excited that they're kind of pushing back to building out a multiplayer solution that's not just the first person shooter one that came out a couple years, the many years ago at Unite. I remember seeing that and I was thinking like, oh man, this is just going to turn off most developers from doing multiplayer stuff in
Yeah,
Unity because
I looked at that code base for the multiplayer shooter one, and I just thought, I was like, finally, basically, because I don't think Unity appreciates, they're not just giving an example of how to do a, multiplayer thing. They are kind of implicitly saying, these are our recommended standards. Now, they don't actually mean that. Like, if you were to actually interview them, they would tell you, no, this isn't meant to tell you the right way to do it. This is telling us one way that we have done it. But a lot of people don't see that. And so when I opened up that original shooter project, I was like, this is not something that you're going to be recommending or representing to people to use. It was complicated in places, and there was not really much in the way of standards for certain things, and it didn't look like something that makes for a good education. It was a good example, not a good education, and that was a kind of unfortunate thing for that one. So seeing more like this is great.
yeah, that was exactly my thought too. The other one, it was cool. Like it felt like it was going to be good if you wanted to build that exact kind of game. If you wanted to build a small team, shooter game, but not for building something like this. And this, like the API, at least from what I understand of it, it looks about the same as the old MLAPI. I assume just with a bunch of improvements coming. So it seems relatively easy to use. I think they just have to make sure that it's performant. As long as it's performant and they don't kill it again, it should be really cool. So I was just really excited about this. And I wanted to start doing some videos on it and stuff. Of course, I know that like looking at the documentation and stuff, it says, hey, it's experimental, it's gonna change, it's gonna break again. So I'm not in a huge rush to do it. But I am pretty excited about it. So I just want to talk about it and see what you guys thought about the whole ML API stuff, and if you guys had even dug into it at all, or if anybody in chat had any thoughts on it too. Kind of curious. And
I just heard about it there, where you basically told me about it like 10 minutes ago or 15 minutes ago. But it looks cool. Like I'm glad they're continuing with the multiplayer stuff. I think everybody who's worked in Unity for any length of time will lament their constant ebbing and flowing with deciding on multiplayer solutions and different things. So the fact that they're going back into it is great. I'm all on board. I haven't looked at that project exactly yet, but I fully intend to pull it down and take a look myself. Although, as you said, it's still in experimental. And I make a point of not investing myself in experimental tools because the rug does get pulled out from under you from time to time. I remember trying to learn the new input system when it was still the new input system, and they changed contracts on that like 4 times. And I just got fed up and said, I'm going to wait until they've locked down some decision making. Now it's great. Now I actually think it's better than Rewired. Well, it's as good as Rewired at least, barring some of the features for the pre-maps and this whole. Either way, it's comparable to Rewired, which used to be the de facto big asset that would solve input. But they've locked it in now, and now it's like it's worth learning, which it wasn't before. So this is probably in the same category for me. I want to wait till other people go through all of the pain points, and then I'll watch someone else's YouTube video, maybe yours, Jason, to tell me how it works, and then I'll learn it myself afterwards.
Yeah, that's how I would approach all of these as well. Part of it, I'm not working on a multiplayer game right now, so there's that. But with anything Unity, as a more intermediate dev, where there's still a lot more to learn than what I already know, having the other people figure out what's what and give some tutorials, and I mean, oftentimes what I'm looking for with any, whether it be the input system or this, I'm kind of looking for the basics, right, just to get things working. And the nuances, the details, the optimizations that come from really understanding the architecture, that's kind of above my head right now. And so I hope that when this is out of experimental, that it's kind of approachable for the basics, right? So that you can just kind of hit the ground running, get something working on your phone, on your, on a test device, so that you can see how it works, and then get that ball rolling from there and learn all the details as you need to after that.
Yeah, it seems like that's the the route it's going to go. I mean, I of course just guessing based on very limited knowledge, but was looking at the demo and stuff and looking at the documentation. It seems like it's going to be a very similar system to like the older Unity networking systems, where you can essentially set a lot of stuff up without writing any code, or without writing very much code at least. And somebody had mentioned that Dapper Dino's got some videos on MLAPI. I definitely recommend going to check those out. They're relatively new. I think they're just like a couple days or a couple weeks old, going through how to set it up, how it works, and stuff. So I think if anybody's interested in it, I'd go check it out. Now, there was a question here, though, on should you use Mirror or the MLAPI? I don't know, but I would probably, depending on where you're at right now with your game, if you're planning on doing a game, releasing it soon and all that, I would probably stick with Mirror, because you know it's going to be there in a year. It's going to work with the version of Unity that you have, and it's not going to change dramatically. The ML API, I don't know how well it works right now, or how much it's going to change over the next year or two or whatever. Right? It may totally change. They may make it no longer compatible with Unity 2022 or something, and there's a new one, or who knows. So I'd wait until it's not in a 0.01 version to use it in a real project, I think. Unless you're really confident about switching it out and have some option. But I would probably go with Mirror there. See, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything else in there to talk about on that. Why is networking such black magic? Seems like there's high enough demand for multiplayer games that it should. Yeah, that's a good question. So the question here is kind of why is game networking essentially like so confusing or complicated? Why isn't it just easy to kind of pop it in and make it easy to use? That would be the ideal, right? It's like an asset where you just drop in a component on things and you say, hey, this is a network NPC, and it works exactly the same, and it just happens to work over the network. It's complicated. Right?
Yeah,
like, on a
it's a
scale
very
1
big
to 10,
question.
10 being the most complicated problem you could have, where is networking in your opinion?
Oh, I'd put it around like a 5.
Okay.
It's
I
the
would say
problems.
it's a scalable one. It can go from a 5 to a 10. It depends the problem you're solving, right? Like, it really comes down to what your intentions are with that networked architecture, because it's a moving needle, as they say.
But for most games, I would say probably around a 5 once you get comfortable with understanding the limitations and differences and the possible problems that can come up. Because the problems that come up are kind of weird and catch you off guard. But I think that it's not too complicated. You just have to change the mindset around more of a command request model. And if you're used to doing that in a single player coding situation, or if you're a programmer and you're doing that, you're doing a lot of command separation there. It makes it a lot easier because you're doing similar patterns of send a message off or send a request and then get a response back and react to that response. And that's basically how you have to code the game. Where a lot of time in single player games, you're coding it as do this thing and change the data and change the object on this thing until this object destroys and like destroy this object. So you're like hit code might be like, subtract a health from this thing's health variable, subtract 1, and if it gets down to 0, destroy the object, right? That you have to change that to, hey, I'd like to hit you for 1, and then the object on the other end has to receive a message, hey, get hit for 1, and then verify it on the server, and then go through that whole process and then send the messages back up. So just it adds like a little bit of a layer of complexity, but a lot of that can be abstracted away. And that's kind of like what they're doing with the ML API and what they do with UNet and Mirror and stuff, is they abstract a lot of that away. Not completely, but a lot of it, so that it feels like you're writing single player code just with some special attributes. Yeah, like a server RPC attribute that means that if this is running on a client, it's automatically going to wrap it up, send a message, and call this method on the server. It's not actually going to call it on the client. But you have to kind of get used to that concept. Once you get used to that concept, it becomes much, much easier. I feel like it starts off as a 10 and then drops down to a 5 once you kind of get in the flow of that idea.
Yeah, I often liken learning network stuff. So if we kind of don't think about it in terms of components and sort of solving the actual gameplay problems of networking. Because funny enough, that's a different thing than networking itself. Networking itself is actually serialization and data transfer. So if we dial it back to like the core of just sending data, it's actually a very similar problem to saving files. It may not seem it, but structurally it's the same idea. It's that you're dealing with something called serialization, which is the idea of taking an object and turning it into a serial one after another form. So you take any piece of data and you squash it down, line it up, and then create it something you can like transmit. And what's cool is you don't really think about this, but it's almost like Morse code where you're tapping out dots. And so what you're doing is you're taking your data in a format that can be tapped out and then listened to and responded to on the other end. And that's what serialization at its core is doing. And so networking is effectively, how do I take as much of the complicated concept of the game state I have on my machine and tell someone else somewhere to be as in sync as I can be. And so the actual act of networking isn't that complicated. Theoretically, you can just bundle up all of that data and throw it into the internet at somebody else. And that technically works. But if you're talking about shooter games or multiplayer or whatever else, you're starting to deal with latency. That's number one. And then you've got things like whether it's authoritative to whose decision. If two things happen vaguely at the same time, who do you trust? If you shot somebody and someone ducked out of the way, so you let the bullet kill them and then rewind the game state to fix it, or vice versa. And so the problem with multiplayer isn't the actual technical stuff per se. People understand how to solve that. There's TCP, UDP, there's tons of other solutions. The problem is you have to know not only how to send that data, you have to learn how to send the data efficiently. For example, if you want to send a vector, you may not always want to send a full vector. You might want to send change sets. So rather than saying the 3 full values of motion, you would say how much a change has occurred between the previous state and the new state, and you'd let the client do it. Then there's stuff too, like what you do or do not send. For example, does it really matter if the particle system on two people's clients look the same? I mean, not really. If two explosions happen, as long as they happen, it doesn't really matter. So you might signal the event, do explosion, but the particles might look different. Now, could that be an issue for a multiplayer game where the explosions can obscure vision? Yes. So now you have to think about that differently. And then you've got stuff like there's just loads of little like tiny things, bullets, and then how does bullets move and this kind of stuff. So multiplayer as a concept isn't too bad. It's once you start getting into the nitty-gritty of these kinds of details that stuff starts to become complicated, depending on what you're doing. A physics-based game is a different multiplayer problem than like a multiplayer card game, because the kinds of data and the amount of it you have to send vastly change. And so, yeah, so that's why the answer is there's not like a press button have multiplayer, because depending on which solution you have, you need to kind of know what architecture you're building, what information you're sending. And that's why at best you'll find like either case specific multiplayer systems like the MMO tools that are out there, or you find low layer network layer stuff that will do the transmission of data for you, but you have to construct your packets of data because it doesn't know what it is you're trying to send or how. So it's a lot of little things you need to understand. And then once you start getting into bigger and bigger stuff, you start getting into stuff like, for example, Overwatch is a great one of this. The way Overwatch works is their entire game is structured with like an entity system, very similar to Unity Dot stuff. And the reason they do this is because they can actually replay their game state. Is they can like store inputs and then replay the game engine with the inputs to replay the experience. And that's how you can do a fly around camera, because it's not a video, it's not a recording, it's not a replay. It's playing the game again with those inputs that you can then fly around and watch, which is really cool. But they can only do that because their network architecture is designed in such a way that you can transmit input events into it. It's a whole thing. It's a whole complicated. They've done talks on this. You can find them online. There's like a GDC talk that goes into detail about why their network architecture is very important to not only the multiplayer side of it, but also to how they can do a replay system. But yeah, that's why it's a complicated it's a complicated topic.
Would you say that I'm sure that the way you set them up are very different between an MMO game and a 2 or 3 player semi-casual game, but while you set them up differently, is the complexity any different between the two, or is it just one's more of the exact same thing?
I guess that would to use an analogy, it's like just literally level design in general. If you've built a level or a room, is it any harder to build more levels? Technically, the answer is no. I mean, you now understand the principles and can build more onto it. But if a level has a new puzzle, you're back to square one again. You have to redesign the new puzzle. And then likewise with multiplayer or networking stuff in general, if you've built a data transfer protocol or you're using something and you can like transmit transforms, you can always transmit transforms. You've now built a system that supports that problem. But if you add grenades or you add guns or bullets, certain things will have new problems, like dealing with one of the classic ones, of course, being if you have a bullet that fires and it's moving its position. If you've got a target and you're not doing continuous collision detection, it can jump over its target in the couple of frames it's doing, and you can end up with weird stuff. So you have to do continuous detection or something, or discrete, where you've got the bullet position either side of the target has like a raycast and it can detect in the middle, and you have to reconcile these sorts of problems. So depending on what kind of problem you're solving, certain things are now new problems in multiplayer, and that have to be. Again, even like voice over IP, people don't think about the voice chat in games. There's like a priority to that. How much bandwidth do you give to the voice commands, to the like voice transmission data versus the gameplay data? And there's like, it's a whole different thing to that. So like the short answer is, for most things, no. If you did have a base engine and you understood, I have a box, I have a second project, I can make the box spin on both sides, you will be able to build 70% of most of your game if it's relatively simple. The remaining portions will be slightly harder as you start hitting weird scenarios going, oh, I'm hitting this guy here and it's taking a few extra seconds longer than it should, or I've killed him but then he healed and all of a sudden there's a disconnect of the state or something. And then you might have to go in and start tweaking, because one of the whole thing later, there's like different formats of how to send that data. There's a general concept of UDP where you're sending data but you're not verifying it's been received. So it's got a nice benefit. Like if I've used this before on client projects where you have something you're trying to interact with and you can send it loads of commands and it just decides to listen to the commands when it gets them. But in other stuff, like if you're doing the kind of sidestep games, if you're doing important banking software, if you send a request for like a transaction between two bank accounts, you can't just hope the other person got it. You kind of need to make sure that both sides are in agreement, everything is the same on both sides. And so when you're doing transactions like that, you need to ensure that it's been received on both sides. So different kinds of problems might require guarantee that it's been received, other ones don't. And so as you start to learn more about network architecture, you'll learn when and where to apply certain solutions to certain problems. But all that being said, like honestly, if you follow an online tutorial, and this is the thing too, it's not a Unity specific thing. It's just networking. It's just TCP. Like if you did a straightforward TCP solution, you could open a brand new C# project with nothing in it, write 40 lines of code, and you've technically got a server, a thing that you can send and receive data to. Then in Unity, you can write 40 lines of code, hook it up to a box, and you could then write some command in a console that makes the box move. That is very doable very quickly with just a few lines of code. It's when you start building onto that to make it into effectively a game that you start to get into more stuff, and there's more to do. So yeah, it is not a complicated problem. It's a complicated to learn problem, and then it's a complicated to scale problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, you used to have 40 lines. You probably do it with like 4 in each side nowadays.
Yeah.
Just thinking it through, it's relatively simple. Also, on your example, you kind of jumped to a banking example, but I think even in games, for your like required messages versus non-required ones, you can do something as simple as like a trade message, right? Like you sending a message to trade an item, or to pick something up, or to buy a microtransaction item, or buy an item off of a vendor on the store. Anything like that, you want to make sure gets sent and is received. And you can either do that with TCP, or a lot of people will implement their own reliable UDP, which is essentially recreating TCP in their own method, so that they're essentially, like, because the way it generally works is like you send a message and you get a received message back, right? And that's all you're really adding onto there. But it obviously slows things down versus just spamming out tons and tons of messages. But yeah, somebody mentioned in chat, by the way, that Photon was releasing a Fusion thing. I don't know if you guys have seen that. I was kind of curious about it, but it said it had some features to do fast-paced games. So I was kind of curious what that was, Photon Fusion, and seeing if that's like some new high-speed thing that they're working on. Because I know Photon was always great for like making it easy to just make a multiplayer game, but it didn't have it wasn't super high speed for like a first-person shooter that was multiple players. Like if you scaled it up, eventually it was going to to start to fall apart. And I think you could do a relatively decent sized game with it last time I played with it. But I mean, people want to scale up to like 100-player battle royale games and stuff, and it's not going to work there. But I wonder if this new Photon Fusion does that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I would say too, just as a note, because Avalanche is saying this in the chat, they're saying just build your own server. You don't need physics on the server usually. Again, this comes down to the difference between what your requirements and expectations are. There's a general rule. Yeah, it 100% depends on the game, because if it matters that your physics is synchronized properly. So one of the ways you can do that, if you're not familiar with kind of how this works, is you can either run the game on the clients, and then you can have the server just send messages back and forth, and the clients will sort of try to keep things matched. Now that works in most kind of scenarios. But say you're doing, again, not specifically physics, but if you're saying you're doing an MMO, you don't want a lot of the game state happening on the client side, because if the game state is happening on the client, then they can actually fudge the messages. So without getting into a whole big thing about how hacking works, effectively they're pinging conversations back and forth to the server from the client. And if you know what you're doing, you can do a man-in-the-middle attack where you put your own code there that will intercept between the game, receive the packages, excuse me, and then basically send them back. And this means that someone can inspect the package structure and then start sending packets that are fake to the server, which means they could start saying, oh, instead of keyboard press equals move 10, what if I do keyboard press move 50 or 500 or teleport myself to certain positions? And they can start breaking your game. And if you're trusting the client's decision about when those things happen, it's like, oh, well, I bumped into this physics object. I collided with this cube, therefore my character stops, and they just never send a position. Well, what if someone hacks the client such that the collisions don't occur, so they can walk through walls on the client? Their new positions will be transmitted to the server, and in everyone else's game, they can walk through walls. But if you instead run an instance of the game on the server, and the server makes the decisions, and it receives the requests for movement from the clients, and the clients move on the server, and then the collisions happen on the server, and someone then tries to mess with it, the server can send back, actually, there's a box in the way there, mate, you can't walk through that, and it'll stop you, because you're proving on the server that even if they send you information that there's no box there, or that they're trying to walk through it, the server can decide that it actually is there and stop you. So effectively, depending on the kind of game you're doing, MMOs being a great example, because that's something where you don't want to give the client control over any of the game state, like at all, because they can do so much damage with that. So you kind of have to have your game on a server somewhere. So that's one of those things that's hard to get your head around at first. Your game can either be clients or peer-to-peer or multiple clients talking to some data source, or it can be a game that's technically running on a server. It's often called there's also a headless server, the whole thing. Like, I don't want to get into whatever, but the clients themselves are effectively asking what's happening and then asking for feedback for when things change, and they don't make the decisions. So there's a lot when you start getting into the kinds of problems you're trying to solve.
Oh yeah. I had to grab this book out, dude. The Exploiting Online Games book that I stole from Sony when I used to work there.
Nice.
Apparently, I had checked it out from our library and just totally forgot to ever bring it back 15 years ago, whenever this thing came out. But I got lots of stories about exploiting online games. I remember like EverQuest, I used to play it. Just on the, like, when you're talking about networking in general, like one of the things you used to be able to do was just run your messages through another box and get all of the data that you weren't supposed to see on your client, or even on your client. You could add in extra stuff. You'd be getting a bunch of messages and data that you didn't necessarily see in the client, like where all the NPCs were in the entire zone, right? You could see all of that and track all of that data because it was constantly sent to the client so that the client could know whether or not to show the thing, but it was sending way too much data. So you could see everything and go like hunt stuff down. People made like little map things. You get like an alert that pops up, notifies you that some rare thing is there, and then you got like GPS to take you right to it, right? Or I remember when I was working at Sony, one of the bugs that I found in my very short QA stint was one where you could remove coin from a bank, but you could remove. So on the client, we did all the checks to make sure that you had the right amount of coin that you could put into the bank and take out, right? You could put coin in and remove it. So we would do a check to make sure that you had enough money to put it into the bank and that you had enough to take it out. On the server, there were no checks. So what you could do was you could add coin to the bank, but you could put in a negative value. Now you couldn't do it on the client because the client would check it. But if you either hacked the client or just modified the message, you could send a negative amount. The server would be like, "Oh, okay, bam, here's a bunch of money," and it would add the negative amount to your personal money, and suddenly like, "Oh yeah, great, we got another hack." And there are all kinds of things like that where like people just checked only on the client and not on the server. And I think that people are getting better at it
Yeah.
as years go by. But
I mean, there's a famous one recently with Fallout 76, where one of the players found out that there was a secret dev room that was used to test like models and heights and positions that effectively had all of the things, all of the guns, all of the special stuff. And so if they could teleport their position to that room, they could just take all of the cool stuff. And so they started doing that. And then the devs started cracking down on like taking the items out of your inventory if they're because they had IDs that would indicate like when they were handed out and assigned, so they could tell when it's been fuzzily stolen effectively. But what players started doing is trading with themselves to effectively like pass it around, to reset it, and the IDs would change. So there was like this little mini black market of people teleporting to the dev room, taking the stuff, trading it exclusively to like make it new IDs and content, and then the devs couldn't track which stuff came from the dev room, and it's this whole like hilarious
item laundering.
Yeah.
That is hilarious. I bet that there are things like that in probably every online game and MMO out there, though. It's just that they're not always found. I don't think I've ever worked on a game that didn't have some secret random dev stuff that devs had so they could get at it when they needed to.
And one of them, like, you've probably seen this in a million games and not realized it. You've probably seen characters flying where they do this weird, like, jump kind of flying where it's like they're hopping in the air. And if you think about it, the reason they're doing this is because it's so much easier. There's no such thing in most games as like a fly mode or a no clip mode, but there is an is grounded flag. And if you turn off the is grounded or turn on the is grounded flag by hacking the client so it thinks you're currently on the ground, you can jump forever as long as you continually think you're on the ground. So whenever you see something do this like bounce flying, what's probably happening, someone is messing with the code so that it thinks it's on the ground, then it does a jump, then it's on the ground, then it does a jump, and it keeps doing that. And that's why it looks like that weird hopping thing. So that's one of the common tricks to get over terrain in network games, where you just basically hack the jump flag. That's kind of you'd probably seen this and not realize that's what you're looking at.
You probably implemented it as a bug multiple times too, right? You just keep jumping. It's funny. Here, let me share this Fusion page real quick and just take a peek at it since it was mentioned. I figured we'd talk about it for a second. So it looks like doing some snapshot comparison, area of interest stuff. It looks like it's probably intended to be for more high-speed games. I mean, that's kind of the way that it was presented, at least. So seems interesting. I'm gonna have to check this out though. I need to dig into this and into Mirror and do a video on them real soon.
Well, I got to admit, like, there's a lot of memes about Unity networking and a lot of people like making fun of Photon in general. But I gotta say, like, depending on, because a lot of the projects I've worked on for clients tends to be like showroom demo stuff. So I've worked on. So here's a bit of a weird one. For example, I worked on a project that was effectively a meeting room for an underwater rigging team that basically had to point out underwater cabling and where certain spokes and components needed to go. So imagine trying to have that conversation. Like, you have to go to this, like, take a sub, go to a thing, and there's this huge underground, like, rig of cables and various stuff, and you have to kind of point stuff out to people. And so they wanted like a little mini, like, game room that they could stand in, have a voice chat in VR, and point at things and say, we need this thing here, we need to move this, we need to interact with this. And so I could just use Pun 2, and it gives me a really quick characters that can float around with a raycast, point at stuff, and talk. And I don't need to like make this huge complicated networking thing. I can make a small multiplayer thing that can have 5 quests or whatever working together in a completely simple little system. And so stuff like that is like, it's so valuable, having just a really quick bring up a project and make it work, you know?
I totally agree. Yeah, having it just be plug and play. This looks pretty cool too. Yeah, I don't know if you saw this, but it looks the demo code at least looks very similar to where they're essentially just reading the inputs over the network and then running everything on the server.
Yeah. That's one other thing too, is that this is one thing that if you've never done networking stuff, it's fun to know about. It's kind of, especially with Pun, the way it works. So imagine if you're running the game and the game can simultaneously talk about networked players versus this player. If you've never done it, you have to figure out, how do you know if the statement you're describing is happening to me or to a networked player? So a lot of the code boils down to, if it's me, do this. If it's them, do this. And it starts to get a little bit hard to wrap your head around how, like, color changes or changing labels or just little things start to become a question of, is it me or them? And this, like, because it's all players, right? You clone the player 4 times, and so is the player a player that represents a me, or is it a player that represents a network player? And if it does, what messages do they receive with which player ID? And that's where stuff starts to get confusing. It's not really the code that's a problem there. It's the kind of mental gymnastics of what connects to what.
Yeah. I totally getting the messages right. That's usually where you get mixed up, is like sending the wrong messages or sending the messages to the wrong person or handling them on the wrong client, like trying to handle them on the client instead of the server. And then it either doesn't work or works wrong, or that kind of stuff. But yeah, this looks interesting for sure. I just like, it looks like it's just kind of mapping up an input and then sending over the input object, right? It's kind of passing that over.
Yes.
Is my guess, but I don't know. I'm excited to check it out, I guess. Let's see what else we got here. Or did you want to talk more about networking stuff? I think there were a couple other questions about it too, but there was a question for Andrew up above too that I wanted to pop up.
Well,
about
I was saying, I'm not an expert on networking at all, like even remotely. I want to make it very clear. I like how I understand how it works mechanically, because I've done a lot of research into it to various things. I've not done more than a few simple setups myself. I've written some networking code, like sans game development. I've built my own UDP stuff for client projects, and I've built some basic Pun networking stuff. I'm not the networking guy. I've only done it insofar as I've needed to, but I understand fundamentally how the underlying architecture works. So yeah, I can help with the basics, but I think Jason here is the one to talk to if you're getting into like more network complex stuff.
Yeah, and I think what I'd like to do is just have a couple guys on who just do networking all day long and just talk about networking with them too, and let everybody just kind of ask some questions. I can think of a couple guys I can hit up and just have on to just chat about a bunch of different network related stuff. But I think you kind of gave a big overview of what it is and what people kind of need to understand and learn. But I guess to get started, I would say people probably should still just jump into Mirror as the starting point for anybody who's just curious and trying to figure out what to do. If you actually want to build a game, I think that's probably the best place to start right now.
As a small aside as well, it's kind of tangentially related, but I honestly think everyone should do this if you're in Unity, just as a mental exercise. So if you go back in time to when you were a kid and used to play games on your console, there was these things called trainers. I don't know if you remember those, but they'd be like the discs or the box you'd plug into the bottom of your console that would like hack the game and give you unlimited health or all these other little things, right? I think there was one called like the replay or something. Then there was like the cheat bro or something. There's a whole load of these like cheat cards or cheat discs. Now,
Game Shark.
Game Sharks, thank you. That was the one I was trying to remember. Yeah, all of those. And if you never used them and if you used them but you never understood what they did, you might remember sometimes you'd open a certain screen and they just all of numbers and you'd be like, I don't know what the hell is going on here. This is a bit confusing. Now, as a game dev, it's worth knowing what that was and how it works, because what that is a hex editor, and it's messing with the in-memory version of all of the stuff that's happening in your game. And it's really valuable to know that the way this works is very clever. What a trainer does, or a Game Shark, whatever you want to call it, is you effectively choose something that you want to change. So for example, the health bar. You click the health bar and you say, I want to look at the health bar. Then you do something that affects the health bar. You take damage, you receive health, you do something. And then you press the button again and it will limit all of the lines that have been changed as a result of whatever action you just did. And all of a sudden, even though you don't know what it is, you're just looking at B5s or 6A, all these you've no idea what you're looking at. What it's doing is it's chunking down all this information until it finds the binary representation in memory that is something to do with health. And then if you do this often enough,
just to not interrupt, but what I usually would do with that is pop up, I would search for the actual amount of health that I have right now, or the amount of money that I have, right? Like if it's 320 health, search for that. and then then you'll see all of those 320s that have changed, right? Just to clarify for everybody,
Exactly.
like how you would find it, like, or the amount of money that you have. You'd search for that amount, and then you search again, a sub search, and it's basically searching through the memory for that number in memory anywhere. Okay, go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure people knew like how you're finding like the bar from the help.
Yeah, that's a good way to be clear on that, because the other way to describe it would be like if you want to jump is harder, for example, because how do you know jump is just true or false, right? It might be a flag. So the way you do that is you would just jump up and down and see the jump numbers change, and you would, or the jump values change, and you try to isolate the bits that are switching. But either way, the point is you run these things multiple times until you distill down the point in memory, and at the end of the day, that's just a place in memory that stores a number that represents the health, 300 or whatever. And once you know where that is, you can just change the number. Like you can just change it to 60, change it to 500. And that's why, if you remember, a lot of those Game Shark things, they wouldn't let you change your health, but what they do is they'd constantly reset it back. So there'd be a kind of weird quirk where you could keep your health at a constant number, but you couldn't just give yourself more health because of the way it was doing the override. So long story short, that's valuable to know, because you can do this in Unity. You can do this in anything, but you can do it in Unity there's a ton of tools out there that you can run on a separate screen where you can inspect your own game, look at the values of your game change, and then learn how to like hack into your own game. Now, this is valuable to know just because once we start getting into that question of talking about networking stuff, this is the stuff people can change. They can mess with those values as a base level. Like it gets more complicated once you start getting into network traffic and man-in-the-middle attacks. But if you start to see your game as just data that is being streamed to the person's machine, you'll have a much greater respect for the complexity of what's going on and how arguably easy it is to play with. And I guess the simpler example of this would be websites. People don't really think about this either. But for you to render a website like this one that you're on, they've given you the website. It may be weird to say, but like you have the website, it is yours. You could literally like steal it right now. You could take all of the code, it's sitting on your machine. And so you can just like, if you're not familiar, if you just right click and click view page source, it's going to show you the code that is rendering the page that you're looking at right now. And so in the same way with games, it's a compiled project, but it is the game. You have it. You have the code on your machine. Now, depending on compilers and how hard it is to get access to it and whatever, it's complicated. But the point is
simply you even have more of the code because there's not a whole bunch of stuff that's on servers online unless it's a multiplayer game.
And all the assets and all the models and all the sound and that's how people are doing these like unpacks, where people are like taking the sound from games or it's because you have it. You have it in your project. You just have to know how to access it. And so the only reason I bring all of that up is to say that it gives you a lot more perspective if you start to like just play around with those ideas. You can find a lot of interesting stuff online that will guide you on how to hack your game, and it'll kind of talk you through understanding the kind of what's going on.
Yeah, I think everybody should do that too. I did that as a teenager and a kid, and I think there was a lot of value in that, just going through and hacking your games. I wouldn't do it on multiplayer games because like it's kind of
multiplayer games
will get you banned and other problems. But I mean, on your single player stuff, and even like multiplayer games where you're running your own servers and stuff, like try hacking on there, try experimenting, as long as it's not a situation where it's going to get your account banned or something. But if it's a game where you're actually allowed to set up your own servers and do that kind of stuff, I definitely recommend it, because there's a lot of value in just understanding how to break things, because then you know how to prevent people from breaking your own stuff, right? Like if you've done a cheat before, you've found a hack before, you know, like, hey, I should watch out for that in the future, and you kind of get some idea of how things work better. There was a question for Andrew that I wanted to share real quick. It already popped up there, and he already shared with me the answer. So I'm going to just pop up the 2 cloth physics recommendations that you had. And then I guess just let you talk about
I'm going to go grab some water so you guys can talk about cloth physics for a second.
All right.
So, I mean, I haven't used either of these, but these are the 2 that I have on our list to test out for our cloth to see if we can make our cloth more dynamic and all that. Magica cloth, Obi cloth. It's interesting too. I'm just looking at the asset store. Magica cloth has 5-star average. Obi cloth is a 4-star average, or between 4 and 4.5. It averages down to 4, which you know can turn me off. But then I watch that video and I think, well, heck, that is, you know, the kind of stuff you're looking for in a game, right? This is what you want, and the difference between the 2 videos is pretty substantial. Where this one shows for me at least, some varied real world examples of how these can be used, not just on player clothing, but with environments and stuff. And so that leads me to think that Obi cloth might be the better bet, because it can work for both characters and for whatever this is to your game, rugs falling down from the sky, or things being torn apart, or cannonballs going through a some sort of fabric. So I haven't used either of them, but I actually think I may own Obi cloth already. Maybe not, I don't know, but certainly I think Unity's in-game or in-engine cloth physics is lacking. It's very difficult to set up. I've never gotten it working the way I would want it to work. So those are the two that I would look into. It's on our to-do list to make integration videos for both of them. So, but there you go.
I was just kind of curious what the reviews were that weren't 5 stars, and they seem to just be, so far, the ones that I saw were all compatibility things. It didn't work with an older version of Unity that they had.
Yeah.
And it could be other stuff, but I don't know. At least the initial things. This one does look very, very neat, though. I wonder how it scales. I'm always curious with all of these things how well they scale. Like how many of these can you actually have on in a game at once? Without the whole thing falling apart. Is it a bunch or just one? But it looks really cool.
100 flags.
I really like this video. This is another one of those like trap ones too, where like you'll see this and like, oh, I need to make a game around weird cloth physics now.
Sure.
Like,
I mean,
a game where you shoot through cloth.
Well, that's the thing. It's like it's so difficult to get realistic. Like if you're thinking like a bed in a bedroom, right? And you've got the sheets on the bed. They've been modeled a certain way. There's sheets there, but they're modeled a certain way. If you drop a crate onto that bed, you would expect the sheets to move a certain way. And last week we looked at Grabbit, the editor physics placement, so you could just drop something on. It'd be really neat if that and these work together in the editor. I don't know if it did. Maybe it does. But where you could then drop something onto your bed and have it naturally deform and then save it so that you don't have to worry about, if it's going to be static, it doesn't have to run at runtime. So I don't know if there's any editor versions of this, maybe, but there's so many potential use cases for really good cloth physics, runtime and at edit time.
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
There's a lot of flags.
A bunch of them. All those mentioned in chat that there was an example with hundreds of them. I tried to click on it and it popped away, but it looks like there's a whole bunch there, so that's cool. Really briefly before this question goes away, I want to answer. Somebody asked about Kyle a while ago coming on and mentioning that he was possibly going to release a networking solution, because Kyle is definitely a networking expert. I don't know where he is with that, if he's done it. I haven't talked to him in a little while, but I'm going to actually reach out to him and see what's going on and see if maybe he'd like to hop on and talk about networking sometime in the next couple weeks. So if anybody's interested in that, make sure that you've liked and hit subscribe and all that stuff so that you know when it comes. Talk more about networking stuff. I've never used cloth physics though in an actual game. I mean, I've worked on games that had cloth physics, but I never was the one implementing it. We always had somebody else that was kind of leading that or driving it, usually a graphics programmer who was kind of implementing some cloth physics, because no solution ever is perfect enough for whatever project.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys. I've never been on a
I've
project where like we could just use graphical things out of the box, and the graphics programmers didn't want to rewrite them at all and change them. Not that we couldn't use them, but they always there's always something that they want to do and change them out.
Yeah, I've never done it either. At best, I've worked on projects where I've been on a late night streaming session with a colleague, and I've watched him painstakingly paint the weights of which portions of the fabric should be, different parts that bend. And that's the closest I've ever gotten to cloth physics myself. I've not really had much use for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've loosely used it in a on a flag to make it wave around and stuff, but never the.
But you can do that natively in Unity, right? Unity has their own basic flag stuff. Like you can do banners and things in Unity without any third-party assets. It's limited in how powerful that can get.
Yeah, I just ended up swapping to an animation anyway because it just looked better. Like, oh yeah, just an animated flag looks much better anyway.
That's why I was thinking with the editor time, if you could sort of bake in the like animate the movement of something happening and then save that as an animation, that should be so much more efficient than doing the math at runtime. For things that can have that, obviously a character moving around might not be able to do that, but yeah.
I wonder. Yeah, I bet there's something to do that. There's something coming if there isn't already. I don't know enough about graphic stuff or the latest graphic stuff, so I have to get somebody in here to talk about that too. Anyway, let's see. Somebody asked if you recommended Pluralsight, Jason. I know I recommend it all the time.
Yeah, I've recommended Pluralsight more times than I can even count. I have nearly 1,000 hours spent watching Pluralsight videos in my career. I've been using it my whole life. Well, since I started programming, and I can honestly say my Pluralsight account has been one of the most valuable things I've ever spent money on. I don't know if that's the same for everybody. I'm going to put an asterisk there because I'm only in games for 5 years, maybe 5.5, 6 years. I've been enterprise developer for an additional 8, maybe 7, 6, 7, 8. I can't even keep track anymore. I've been doing most of my work has been working on everything from mobile apps to desktop apps to web servers to APIs to whatever. And so Pluralsight isn't, their Unity stuff is pretty bad, if I'm going to be polite. It's not great. Like they're just, I don't like
they tend to buy a lot of companies and stuff, right?
They do, but right now the stuff they have there for Unity, I don't like. It could be better, maybe it improves, but the stuff they have at the moment, it's not great. There is this nice shovel lesson thing that's quite good, but that's the only one that's kind of okay. In general, I much recommend Udemy over Pluralsight for Unity specific stuff. There's a lot of great tutors over on Udemy, but Pluralsight is probably the best value if you've been working in Unity and you're not super familiar with C# and you're kind of uncomfortable with how much C# you know. Pluralsight has this entire beginner's course in C# that will talk you through so much stuff. This is like better than the first 2-3 years of college education you'll get, and this will cover like everything from like all of the fundamentals of the language, stuff that you're probably not going to hit unless you've been experienced to it. Stuff won't come up in games as much. Architectural patterns and exception handling and how to handle asynchronousness and using like locking collections and concurrency collections and contravariants and covariants of your object types, like extension methods, T4 templating. There's a whole load of a million things to do with C# that you will never have used to really learn. And this will like round you out as a developer. If you learn all of this stuff, it just makes you better at the language. If you don't need it, that's fine. Like I'm not saying everyone needs to do this, but I would say if you are a programmer of any kind, like some of these are really simple. They're just nice kind of primers on some of the basics. Some of it get into enterprise stuff you may never need, like how to deploy on an AWS cluster stuff. Like, but at the end of the day, I do think at least some level of this is valuable to everybody who does C#, whether it's in Unity or not. And you can get like a month for free or something, and you'll definitely cover, like you'll see these courses are like 8-10 hours for some of them. So you can get through a lot of hours of course content for free over the course of it for a period of time. So
yeah, it looks like they're free for April too.
Yeah, there you go.
I totally agree with this too. I didn't realize that they had put together an actual kind of curated course here, which it looks
so
like
they have,
is really nice. And as I was scrolling through, I saw the C# interfaces one. I actually learned C# interfaces from Jeremy Clark at a meetup, from this guy at a meetup in San Diego. I was like, oh, wow. Or it might have been a code camp. It was something like that. I was like, now I get it. He taught me quite a few, or it was a dependency injection was the not interfaces. I learned the dependency injection from him, how it worked, why it was good, and yeah, quite a few other things from him too. Might have been interfaces too. I don't know, but this is definitely good stuff. And the content on here, the curated stuff, like you said, some of the non-curated stuff, they just buy a lot of companies and they take all of their stuff in too. But their curated things are really good. At least the ones that I've used personally. I really love the design patterns library too. The Pluralsight design patterns library is like a 15-hour long video library of C# design patterns. I'm gonna pull that up too. It's
Like I said, I've watched like nearly, I think it's around 800 or 900 hours of Pluralsight. So I probably watched and it's almost all C#, and then there's some stuff on Angular and various. Back when I used to be a web dev, I learned a lot of web stuff there too. So yeah, I've probably watched like everything C# on Pluralsight at this stage.
this is the one. So here you see like all of the patterns that it covers, and then each one of them, like you go in null object pattern, and it's nicely broken into like the examples why you would use it, the bad solution, and then the good solution of why you would actually use the pattern and how the pattern looks in like a standard case. They just kind of go over a bunch of them. And I found these like just to be really useful to just like go check one out randomly, like when I need a little downtime, want to go just find a different thing when I was first learning about design patterns.
And a quick shout out to the unit of work pattern right there in the middle. I was literally talking to somebody earlier today describing the unit of work pattern. It's not relevant to anything really in games at the moment, but it's funny. I literally like this came up in a conversation I had earlier today.
Yeah, this is good stuff. So definitely you recommend it. I think I recommend it. Andrew recommends it too. I'll recommend it for him.
I recommend any form of learning. I think it's always daunting and maybe not the most fun to sit down and watch something, but what you get out of it and you know how you can utilize it oftentimes right away in projects. I'm a huge fan of learning in any way you can do it. I mean, I'm sure all the people here watching have found, you know, your courses and your YouTube videos, and that's why they're here. So I'm sure they all agree too.
They're all into learning too, like the rest of us. So this one actually is more for you, Andrew. 3D modeling question. Says that they're new to 3D modeling and want to know what's better for rendering entire scenes. They're doing it in Maya, but recently noticed that Cinemachine can kind of do that too. I assume it's like Cinemachine and some other things kind of to lay out the shot. What do you? I am not good at 3D modeling, and I get lost every time I go into Maya now. So,
yeah, I actually don't do the modeling myself. I've also opened up Maya a couple times and found I didn't have a third mouse wheel or mouse button, and that threw me off course there. But my understanding of the modeling world is use what works, and I know that's kind of generic answer, but there's demos from Blender, there's demos from Maya, there's demos from Unity, of course, and Unreal, where it looks gorgeous, and they all look gorgeous. And if somebody didn't say this was rendered in XYZ, you probably wouldn't know, right? And so my thinking there is, without knowing Maya myself, without knowing the different 3D modeling applications, I would bet all of them are capable of producing amazing output. And it really comes down to what you have available, what you have that you understand, and then also what your end goal is. I mean, obviously, if your end goal is to make games, then maybe doing it in Unity would make a lot of sense, because now you're going to double dip, right? You're going to be learning not only how to set things up in Unity, how to optimize scenes in Unity, how to use the lighting and all that, but you're also creating the work you want to make, the output that you want to make, whether it's real time or not. I mean, Unity doesn't have to be a real time engine. It can be, you know, you can make films in it where one frame takes 2 seconds to render, because you're exporting to film. You're not making it real time. So you could do it in any of these applications. That's why I would say. I hope that's a good answer for that.
And my guess is that it's probably easier if you're an artist to do it in Maya. Probably easier to get the lighting right and the render and performance and stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you want to do games, right? Getting it in. What was that?
The Mandalorian? You know the Mandalorian TV show?
Yeah.
That's obviously that looks pretty good. Like, it's for people who aren't familiar with how much of a budget it takes to do CGI for like TV shows, there's a very good reason why like the millions that it takes to do a Marvel style movie is very different than the average like TV show with characters and superheroes. And on balance, The Mandalorian looked really good for the amount of money that it cost to produce. It still costs a lot by like us normal people standards, but relative to like how good the quality of the visuals are relative to how much it costs is quite low. and they use Unreal Engine to render their scenes. So the short answer is yes, you can use a game engine. It really does come down to just doing your homework and figuring out what it is that you need to do.
But if you're fairly new, you probably want to stick with one thing.
Yeah,
right?
and to be honest, if you're doing modeling, like if I'm being honest, you probably want to stick with first of all learning the modeling and the rendering in your modeling tool, and then if the game engine supports your needs, then you have the experience and knowledge to switch. But I would say if your actual intention and goal is to render things out, there's no point in making it harder for yourself and having multiple tools and things to switch between.
Yeah, I'd agree. But I think I'd like to get some artists on here again and have them answer too. I should recommend for that. I'm gonna pop this question up. Somebody was asking about a different question, I think, but they're asking about an asset to control characters and NPCs, or what asset do you recommend for using for character control and for NPCs? So, do you guys? Is there? I think we've talked about this a little bit recently about like actual player character controllers last week and using the kinematic character controller. But is there any like special controller or anything that either one of you guys ever like regularly use or recommend for AI? Like I can't think of anything that I normally use. I
actually use kinematic character controller for the AI as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they actually have a sample scene in one of the projects where it's just a swarm of AI using the character controller. Like I said, the reason I like it is because of the reliability of physics interactions with multiple collisions and things, and the fact that it handles moving platforms gracefully. And here's the thing, for anybody who's never written a character controller, you have no idea how complicated a seemingly simple task of having a character jump onto a platform and move with the platform actually is. There's a lot of nuance to that, because if you think about it, like you've seen this thing where two boxes like flip and bounce into each other. Imagine that, but you're standing on something and you have to keep the grounded flag right so that it still works, have the platform move, have the player move, and also have things like jumping while on a platform still be available. So you get into this weird thing where you have to like parent things to platform, whatever. So if you've got a character controller, like kinematic character, which just lets you pop a platform down, put a script on it, and then it works, you cannot count how valuable that is. So the short answer is I use kinematic character controller whenever I need basic character controller stuff. Pretty much any character controller I need now. It's kind of replaced all the other ones I used to use.
Oh, I think that's a pretty fair answer. That's not something I had considered, but it does make sense. If you want your character to act a lot like the player and just work, yeah, why not?
I mean, obviously, if it's like a swarm of things and it's simpler, you don't need a character controller at all. You can just put like a capsule or a sphere and mess with the transform. Or if you're doing like a flying drone, do your own Euler integration and just have a simple, this is my velocity, this is my, acceleration, and you can write your own and do like a steering behavior approach. Or if you're doing just the basic thing, just put a rigid body on it and manage it that way. There's like, you don't need a character controller if it's not literally a character. But if it is a character, you can just use a character controller just like you would a player. You just provide inputs differently than you would a player. So it's entirely up to what you need. You get into weirder territory when you start talking about culling, and the idea that if from a high level perspective, if you've got a ton of enemies and your character turns around, so everyone already knows you can do occlusion culling. You can just turn off the visuals because you're not rendering them. That's fine, but that's only part of the equation. If you play a game like Spider-Man, the new Miles Morales one, you don't think about it, but there's streets of people like walking along constantly all of the time doing networking and pathfinding and like animating and moving around each other. And that's really taxing. And so what you want to do is you don't want, so without getting too much into how that works, they're discrete regions. They're like, the game is like quadrantized out into different chunks. And as you swing around, you're like moving between chunked zones, and other zones are unloading as other ones load in. Now, if you've got AI characters who are in different zones, if you don't think about this correctly, what happens is you turn off one zone, turn on one zone, and the characters would like either teleport position or delete, and new ones would appear. And you kind of want to avoid that problem. So you want your characters to walk between zones, but also you want to make sure things like collision still happen. So two characters will like move around each other and stuff. So there's a lot of nuance in that interaction. And one of the things that gets really interesting is, so here's the thing. If there's two characters having a sword fight, like they're fighting to the death in front of you in a game, there's like 50 things going on. There's like animations and sound and collisions and all this stuff. But here's the thing. If you turn around and just 180 and look in the other direction, the fight's still going on, but how much of that from systemic perspective is required to happen? Because if you think about it, you don't actually need to see the animations. You might need to hear the sound if you're close enough, but you don't need the swinging animations. You don't need the collisions. You don't need anything. And so when you don't see it, you could just have the characters walk through each other, technically, because when you turn around, as long as that wasn't like causing something weird to happen, you can get away with it. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff that happens where you don't realize it, to circle it all the way back. In a game like Spider-Man, when players are out of view, they're just a floating dot. They're like a conceptual vector that moves through space because they don't need to be anything else. They need to maintain their position and rotation, so they'll need to quaternion or whatever, but they don't need anything that makes them a person to you until they like enter your sphere of influence. And so it starts to get, when it comes to character controllers, sometimes it could be a bit heavy to have a full character controller for enemies and NPCs if scenarios occur where technically like a big battle behind you of 500 people versus 500 people, if they're like in a castle over there, until you get there, it's just a bunch of dots and health bars. And until you get there, you can bring back up and show all this stuff. And so the way you solve this problem is as things start to get bigger, you actually don't have NPCs anymore. You just have this conceptual data that's occurring and changing. So yeah, you don't always need a character controller for your characters. You just need them when they're there. And it gets really nuanced once you start solving this problem at scale.
Yeah, it's a lot like LODing, and I think in some cases I've seen you can just they're almost LODing the AI, the NPC logic completely. So it's like going from an advanced character controller that does animation, controls animator controller and other things, down to something super simple that just moves along a straight line with simple vector movement or keeps track of the position internally without even moving a game object until you've come into the area. And it's interesting because you do the same kind of thing with MMOs on the server side. Like there are areas where there are no people. Those areas are not processing things. Everything just goes to sleep until people come close enough that they can interact with that thing. Or like, like there's 3,000 camps of orcs out there. You don't need all of those orcs running around spamming chat and sending messages and stuff if there's nobody around them. So you start to bring those things alive as people come into regions around them using something like a quad tree or an oct tree, or even just like a simple grid where you bring up the regions around you or the areas around you.
And fun fact, this is one of those things where like once you start getting into game dev stuff, there's a lot of nuance about performance that you will never understand until it starts hitting you. Like one of them being, we talked about camera culling, all this stuff. At the end of the day, it boils down to, can the camera see something? But here's the thing, if you've got multiple cameras, multiple things are now visible that wouldn't normally be there. So you actually have different concerns if there's multiple people or angles or cameras or whatever. And completely separate to that, but also related, is in VR, when you used to have games like shooter games, you could have a character that walks around and just like, first person shooter moves around. In VR, when it's attached to someone's head, people can swivel their head around pretty quick. And so the whole turning on or off these things is actually now a performance concern because you have to deal with people just like snapping their head around, looking at stuff. And it's like the amount of things you have to turn on or off is like, you have to really attack these problems differently depending on the platform and things you're dealing with. And, if you're interested in the Spider-Man example specifically, there is a GDC talk, I can't remember the name, but they actually show you this, and they show you Spider-Man swinging, and they show you like the entire streets turning on or off as he swings down through it. That's a really fascinating thing to see.
Oh, that is cool. Love to check that out. Another one that, or another video, like actual like long tutorial video, was that Unite talk on and totally inside the game.
Oh,
They showed some things.
Yeah.
It's not exactly the same, but they showed a lot of the area of interest and lighting up and activating objects so that they could keep the entire game seamless with no loads, through the 4-hour experience. And they, in the video or in the talk, I think it's all online, but they showed like, the editor view of it. So you can see the things kind of like popping in, loading up and how they're turning on, how they're turning back off as you go back the other way and stuff. Kind of see how that system kind of works in a real world example with actual Unity code. So I thought that was a pretty good one.
Yeah. And they actually got access to the source code from Unity and made changes to the engine to support some of the stuff they're doing, because they have
they actually made improvements. That's good stuff.
Yeah, they don't just use the normal update cycle. They've got this whole concept of late update and early update, and they do additionally on top of the existing late updates and stuff. I think they call it pre-update or post. I can't remember. Pre-awake. I think that's one of them. But they like literally manage their own garbage. The thing that really surprised me about that talk more than anything else was they said they don't manipulate world space vectors. How crazy is that? All of their objects move in local space. That may not seem like a big deal to you, but if you tried to program your game such that everything always thinks in local space, that's really difficult. And on top of that, they don't manipulate vectors. They split the vector into X, Y, and Z. They manipulate the floats, and then they recompose the vector when they move the character. So their code base is entirely about local spaced XYZ floats. That's how they get such squeaked out performance to make sure there's zero loading sequences between things. It's crazy how much like their millisecond time is insane.
Yeah, that whole project is impressive. But anybody that hasn't seen it though, you should definitely check that game out. Let me pull it up. Just want to share it real quick. Where is it on Steam? Everybody knows which one we're talking about. It's this one right here.
Yeah,
like a long platform. You just keep going on and on and on and on and on. I think it's like 4.5 hours. Little puzzle platformer. Obviously, great reviews, and 2016 I think is when they did the talk. So highly recommend this thing. Cool. So
I just linked you the talk specifically.
oh, okay, cool. Let's pull that one up too.
Yeah, reaching stutter-free 60 FPS in Unity. It's yeah.
So yeah, this is it. Tools, tricks. Yeah, that's the one. Everybody should go check it out. I'll drop it in chat too. Go check it out later.
There's a second one as well from Unite Europe. Let me pull that up. That you should probably watch if you're interested in this topic. It's called Squeezing Unity. That's another one that's really good. Now, some of the stuff in that is mildly outdated. For example, you're going to be advised in that talk to not use animations with the UI canvases. They fixed the issue with that for garbage, so that's not as bad as it used to be. There's other stuff in there too, like caching of transforms and various things that are slightly different. But it's still just good to watch these. There's the third one as well, which I can't remember. That's really good performance. But effectively, just check out check out the Unite talks. Effectively, Unite and GDC both have really good talks in general. Both channels have tons of stuff on multiple games and how they solve problems.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see a new Unite talk sometime whenever that happens. I think it'll be cool. I have a new Unite, a new in-person event again sometime. It'd be cool. All right, let's see. Yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about today?
The only thing on my radar is I had a small rant about the new Nier game I've been playing and why it's not great. So
yeah,
that's one up if you run out of stuff.
Why don't you share that one?
Okay. So I'll. This is going to get weird because I'm going to have to give some background on a game series you've probably never heard of. So
you want to screen share and show everybody real quick?
Oh, I don't have anything. I just have like 5 words in a note thing just to remind myself. So you'll if you want, you can pull it up and you can show some stuff. I guess to start with, the game Nier Automata came out in 2017, and that's the first I heard of this series. The game, you've probably seen it. It's the one with the robot and the half-naked women backflipping and stuff. It's cool. It's a really awesome game, and this is. I think it's a really good example of game development for multiple reasons. It's got problems like anything else, but I recommend people play this game for one reason more than anything else, and it's because I actually had this conversation literally earlier today too. So, small bit of philosophy thing. There's this phrase called "the medium is the message," and that basically means that what you're sharing is only half of the information. The medium with which you choose to share it is actually alters the message you're giving. So that's why kind of war propaganda stuff posters sell a different message than a book would, or a pamphlet or something. There's something baked into the medium you're choosing to send your message in. And so why do I bring that up? Well, because there's books, there's movies, there's TV shows, and each medium has its own strengths and weaknesses as a platform. Books are really good at exposition, at giving you these large worlds conceptually to explore. And the reason why bringing a book and making a movie out of it tends to suck is because the platform or the medium of a movie is not built for telling those kinds of stories. And so what ends up happening is you have to trim all of that exposition and you end up telling it in a different way, because what a movie is good at is emotion. If you've got characters emoting on screen, and the director has their own tools by using things like visual storytelling that you can't describe in a book. There's this whole thing called Chekhov's gun, for example, that's really interesting in how directors use the Kuleshov effect to like change the way you perceive scenes. I don't want to get into a whole thing. I just want to highlight the fact that the medium you watch will drastically affect things. There's a reason taking a book and turning it into a movie is going to end up making it worse. Well, taking a movie and turning it into a book tends to make it better because it adds exposition and information to the movie. Again, why do I bring all that up? Well, because games are their own medium and they have different things they're good at. They're from movies and books. And a lot of people make the mistake of treating a game engine like, oh, I can just tell a story in here. I can just talk about it and write it. And the problem is that's what they're built for. So all of this to be said, Nier Automata is an example of a game that uses the fact it's a game to its advantage. So that's kind of a very weird, without saying too much about how the game works and what it does, the point is, one example, your character is a robot. And so the idea is electronic stuff is kind of how the character functions. And they've got a certain amount of RAM on how they can focus and do things. You can do things like turn off the HUD of your game so you don't get health bars for your enemies. So your character has more RAM to then do other things like upgrade their weapons. So the idea is, narratively speaking, you can play with the relationship between you and the character. So you can literally have her turn off her own ability to analyze the environment to upgrade her weapon set, which then gives you less feedback. Same with the audio. You can actually take out the audio module. You can't hear the game anymore because she can't hear anything, but you can then get more ability into your health or whatever. So that's one example of how the game really plays with that. Now, all of that's just generally a selling point for why I think Nier Automata is an awesome game. But here's the thing. It's my first introduction to the series, which I found out was a series. It's not the first game in the series at all. It's the third game in a series called the Drakengard. Well, it's an offshoot of the Drakengard series. So before this, there was another game called Nier, just Nier, and it was out on Xbox and PlayStation. And Nier, as a game, was set like 3,000 or 4,000 years prior to Nier Automata. And it's sort of like setting up the lore of the universe that gets you to Nier Automata. And that game had another game set 1,000 years before that called Drakengard, which was part of another series called the Drakengard series, which had 4 games or 3 games in the Drakengard series. But here's the thing. Each of those games have multiple endings. So Drakengard's 5th ending was the starting off point for Nier, which came out in 2010. And then the 4th ending of Nier is what gets you to Nier Automata, which has whatever its story. So a lot of complicated stuff, which is to say that like the game has evolved and grown and changed, and there's various different things. Now, why do I bring all of this up? A new game dropped this weekend, but it's not a new game. It is that second one, the one just before this, set 1,000 years before, remade, remastered, and whatever for the new audience of fans like myself who'd never heard of the old series. So the new game is Nier Replicant. And that's just, and it's, if you've enjoyed the series, and there's like a lot of Easter eggs for you as a player in the game, for like if you understand the lore and logic or whatever. But here's my problem with the game. This is a remastering of an old game, so it looks like the new one. Visually, it's quite nice, and it has a lot of cool, like they've changed the combat and stuff. And it's so the combat's closer to how it is now in Nier Automata. But from a game design perspective, this game came out in 2010, the original version of this game. And the new game is a remastering of that game, which means it's got 2010 sensibilities for game design. And so this game's fundamentally worse in almost every.
Uh-oh.
Way. Every
way,
way. I
yes.
think that's what he was trying to say.
In every. Interesting. Now I need to play them both. I haven't played either.
I'm certainly getting I think I understand what he's saying, where I don't play too many games myself, but there are games when you revisit the game that you loved, 20 years ago, or even when you were a kid, right? They're different games. They're completely different games. And how, like, I don't know, for me, like, starting with like Zelda as an example, the first Zelda on the Nintendo, you get a sword and that's it, and then you have to figure everything out. There's no story. I mean, there's a little story, but that's it. And then over time, the way that they tell the same story or similar stories changes, and helper characters come on and tell you where to go or give you more insight, and all those ebbs and flows of the design changes over time. And I think I would hope that things get better over time. In general, there's going to be ups and downs, but maybe that's what he can tell me if that's what he was going
sorry
for.
about that. Gosh, my internet dropped out again.
You're saying Replicant was way better and they had improved everything.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, so Replicant is worse in my opinion in literally every way. That doesn't mean it's a bad game. It just means it fundamentally it was a game made in 2010 relative to now, and the newer game was made in 2017. So there's 7 years of knowledge and gameplay and experience that made it into Nier Automata that just isn't really there in Replicant. So it's interesting if you're a fan of the series and like the lore. It just isn't as good of a game. It just fundamentally has game design problems that have been sort of ironed out. And yes, a fun fact, someone mentioned in the chat, there's 2 versions of Nier originally. There was actually. So this game that it's remade is called Nier Replicant. There was 2. There was Nier Replicant and Nier Gestalt. They were basically the exact same game, except in one of them. So without going into too much, the starting of this story is you're protecting a little girl. And if you're playing Nier Replicant, you're her brother. If you're playing Nier Gestalt, you're playing her father. But other than that, it's exactly the same game. And so they've chosen to remake Replicant.
Why is it a separate game?
The whole thing about Japan released one of them, and there's a whole it's the whole thing. But generally, the idea is that it seems canonically they're sticking with it being the brother now. That seems to be the go-to with this decision. So yeah, it is an interesting universe and story, and I like it and whatever. And it's actually, if you're interested in like a lot of philosophical ideas, the games kind of go over those over the series about what does it mean to be human, various different things like that. But just at a sheer technical level, and for the reasons I loved Nier Automata, is intrinsically tied to what it's trying to say. It's like it's about games and it's about like robots and automation and that kind of stuff. When this one is set, I think we're like 1,000 years or more than that in the past. And so it's a lot more running through fields and fighting monsters and sort of the origins of some magic stuff. And it does set you up for what the events will happen, but like it is a different story. And so, yeah, like it's not a bad game at all. It is pretty good. I am enjoying it. I'm just putting the asterisk there that if you're new to the series, you'd probably actually want to play Automata and then go back to Replicant if you like it. But you wouldn't get as much out of this as a game. So,
okay.
Actually, I might as well explain what I mean by the game design sensibilities too, because it might sound like I'm being just arbitrarily mean. So let me give you a couple of examples. In one of the things in game design, like there's like things you learn about game design the more you study it that sort of changes your perspective. And one of them is kind of trying to guess what the player wants to do. And you've seen nowadays games are all about open world. And one of the biggest strengths people talk about with maybe like Breath of the Wild is people talk about the fact that you can go fight at the start. You can just go to Ganon and fight. You'll probably lose, but you can do it. That's like one of the cool things you can do because the game is giving you creative freedom to make that decision. But the problem with games from 10 years ago is they were much more linear in those decision making. They would sort of draw you from place to place to place. And if a game looked open world, it often lied to you. So even going back to one of my favorite games, Ocarina of Time, it's a large open space, but only like 3 of those places are explorable. Most of the places, like there'll be a locked gate until some narrative beat happens and then something will open and you can go visit that area. So it looks really big, but it's not really very interesting. Now, both Nier games do this. but Near Replicant does it to an insane degree, which infuriates me. It opens out into a field, and there's all this cool stuff, and I want to go this way, and I just run off in a direction, and the game actively stops me, and the character says, I don't have time for sightseeing right now. And it's like, oh, so I'm not allowed to play the game? I have to go do the narrative beat you've chosen right now? And again, I understand why, but that's one of those like game sensibility stuff that you learn you just don't do. Like people do not like having their like exploration experience sort of taken away from them like that. And there's other stuff too, like there's a sandstorm in one area that stops you moving. And if you walk into the sandstorm, the game just says, I can't progress any further, I can't see. And it teleports you back out of the sandstorm. And you're like, okay, so again, even Zelda had this, it's the same thing. But here's the difference. They have collectibles you can see in the sand. So until you solve the solution of like getting through the sandstorm, they're bugging you. They're slightly out of range. And so there's tons of these design things that you just wouldn't do. You wouldn't show the collectibles until you're allowed to travel through the sandstorm in a more modern game. There's like there's one of those ones you have to follow an NPC, and you're following an NPC, and if you get out of certain range from them, it like gives you a message and sends you back. And like, there's all of these little things, and none of these are detrimental, but there's stuff that as you learn more about game design, you kind of shear off the rough edges and you make the game a tighter, cohesive experience. And Nier Automata has solved a lot more of those than this Replicant has. They haven't really moved these things in. Yeah, so that's my like long-winded review on the idea, is that it is a good game, but it is dated. It is visibly, noticeably a game from an earlier time. The way it does cutscenes, the way it interacts with the player, the way it doles out experience stuff. There's a lot of things which just feel older. And so if you're a fan of Nier Automata, you're going to want the extra lore, and it's worth putting up with these sort of older tropes because it still looks great, like it's a modern remastering. But from a gameplay minute-to-minute perspective, you might start feeling like it's wasting your time in a lot of places. So,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That would be frustrating. I mean, that was my frustration way back in the day. I remember the original Metroid, had that concept where you couldn't go certain places until you got certain gear or something. But they would kill you if you did, So if you went through that door, oops, I can't be here, I'm going to die. So you better leave, otherwise you could die.
Yeah.
But then
like that's a perfectly respectful.
Exactly. Yeah. But then the next Metroid came out for Game Boy, and this is young Andrew here. And they had this computer character that would say, great, I've discovered this. I've unlocked the next door. I'm going to go do this while you do that. And so you get the next tiny little chunk. Now, this is Game Boy, so they probably had reasons. But you get the next tiny little chunk. And instead of having this big open Metroid world to explore, you had only bite-sized bits that you couldn't do anything else. You knew exactly where you had to go. There's probably a couple hidden things that are in there. Maybe you could go back earlier once you have a new item or something. But for the most part, it was just leading you one step at a time. And it was, for me, very boring compared to the original, where you could just die.
So if this is interesting, if you're interested in that topic, so there's the channel Game Maker Toolkit by Mark Brown. He's got a series, and one of the series he does is called Boss Keys. And what he does is he actually takes a game series. He's done both Zelda and Metroid and a few others. And what he does is actually talks you through that exact thing you're describing, the progression path. And he's built a little graphing thing where it actually highlights at this, these areas unlock, then this, then these unlock. And you can see the graph side by side and say, like, tangibly, this is why that game feels more claustrophobic and doesn't give me the freedom, because you can actually see where the gates occur and how they progress state. It's really fascinating because it really makes you think about the adventure you're giving the player. Like you have to release the content in such a way that adds exploration. There's this entire concept called how do they phrase it? It's like it's the puzzle problem of the key and the door. And it effectively means that one of the worst things you can do in a game is give players a key before you show them the door, because that means nothing. It means that there is no puzzle anymore. There is I randomly found a thing. I now randomly have to find the door. You haven't engaged in any problem solving, which is the whole point of having that kind of thing. So there's a reason why most games, like horror games, I've said this before, will probably have the key somewhere halfway down the corridor, probably on the left or right doorway side. And that's kind of because they don't want you to find it in the first room. they don't want it to be so long it takes you to the last room. You can kind of reason out the mentality of the game designer by where they put it. And these things are like very cheap solutions to those problems. And good game design gets you there in a way that feels organic, having that aha moment of, oh, that's why that's there. I can go back now and do this other thing. And so there's a lot of tricks that games like Metroid used to do where they'd give you something. For example, they'd give you a new power-up, but then you wouldn't be able to leave the room until you've demonstrated that you understand the mechanic, because that's how they ensured that you know it's a new mechanic now and that you can engage that in the new area. Similarly with how they telegraph certain things and circle you back to different rooms. There's a lot of interesting tricks to the psychology of play. Just basically the structure of level design is very interesting, and you can see how it evolves per culture. Like Zelda games have really changed their design culture. It used to be around these singular dungeons, and now it's a lot more around like the shrines and that kind of thing. And it changes entirely the perspective of how the game experience is for a player. So that's a whole different conversation I could have. But suffice it to say, level design is really interesting in terms of how it makes you think as a player. And that's something you really consider. What is the moment-to-moment conversation a player is having?
Totally.
Yeah.
And subscribe to that channel. It's just a great channel in general. Like every
this
video.
This is the guy, right? This is the one you're talking about?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So there's one called Boss Keys. I don't know where it is there exactly.
I could search on his channel. Let's hit search.
It's kind of should be one of the that one there. So you see he's got Zelda there. If you scroll down, one of them, he starts moving into Metroid at some stage. Metroid 1, Metroid 2, Metroid Prime, there you go. So there's all the Metroids. So you can just compare those videos and he'll go in vivid detail exactly why the different Metroid games have a very different feel psychologically and what benefits they give you. It's really interesting. If you cut somewhere to the middle, you should have this like a little map show up on screen, a kind of hand-drawn, not that one. It's like a graphical art thing he's done. Maybe it's near the end. I can't remember which video is which ones. It'll kind of look like a little graph drawn in Illustrator or something. Oh, maybe it's not done in that one. Try Metroid Prime 2.
We'll find it.
Yeah, I know he's done it for Zelda one. I just assumed he had the same graph. It's been a while since I've seen it.
The concept, I mean, makes total sense. Like as something that even we should do when designing a game to better understand what we've built. I know for me, I tend to, especially once I've got a game going, I'll be like, oh, I need something over here. I need something over here. I'll just throw things in. But having that sort of post-mortem, pre-mortem, and just having that document as part of your game design doc seems probably very valuable to have, just to do the exercise yourself.
I gotta go through and make sure I hit like on all these videos too.
I can't find the exact thing I'm looking for, but here's a description on his Patreon about the maps he's talking about. Oh yeah, and I have definitely seen that Ego Raptor sequelitis video. It's really good. I've seen his whole series actually. The one on Mega Man is specifically valuable, but yeah, his entire sequelitis series is great as well. So this is what I'm talking about. This is Mark Brown's solution to mapping out dungeons and games. So he uses this as an indicator to show you where's the entrance, where's the boss, where's certain pickups that are key items, and he will use these graphs to demonstrate certain games, and he'll highlight how you can actually see the branches, the graphs of where games explode in certain areas and then shrink you back down in possibility space, and it just makes you think about what possibilities you have. So I recommend checking out his videos to really get a sense of that kind of conceptual explosion of design.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense too. So they're showing him going in through the entrance there, grabbing the key off to the right. I wish you could see my mouse here. And then opening the red door, and then you go up, grab the other red key, open the top red door, grab the arrow key, open the 2 arrow doors, grab the other blue key, and get to the boss, right? Instead of grab the red key, open a red door that's right in front of it, and then grab the yellow key and open the yellow door right in front of it.
And the principle is to show not just like, obviously, oh, this is how you get through stuff. It's by opening this door, how many paths or rooms are now available to me? That's the kind of the point of the exercise. Because some games, it's I can now go to 2 rooms, I can now go to 1 room, I can now go to 3 rooms. Others is I can go to 5 rooms, but I can't progress past this point. And so it's this sort of thing. And separately, there's a Peter Fields video I mentioned a few times on prototyping. And his video highlights something, a bunch of different concepts for how you design levels. And one of them he talks about is one-way valves. And so you have to take that into account all. Where as you progress through a level, sometimes the level designer will gate your backwards progress until you can finish something. And I don't mean like a boss room where you fight in a single fight. I mean like you might enter an area of the map and you have to resolve something before you leave it. And the reason why you do that is actually, it may seem like it's limiting you, but it's doing it on purpose. It's actually a really cute telegraphing way of telling you the solution to the thing you're trying to do is here. So you don't have to, because you've probably done this before in older games. I think Metroid did this to me once. It's where I don't know what game it was. There was some game anyway where there was a solution I needed, and I didn't know where the hell it was. No, Bioshock. It was Bioshock that did this to me. There was something I needed, and I didn't know where the hell it was. So I could backtrack all the way back to the starting room, and I did because I didn't know what I was looking for. And it turns out I was like 1 room away from the thing I needed. I couldn't find it, but because the game didn't gate my previous progress, it let me walk all the way back to the original place, and I ended up like getting lost. Now, here's the thing. Bioshock 2 has a train as a narrative device that you get on that moves you from section to section. So you know, as you're solving the problems, that only this area has the solutions to your problems. And when the game unlocks, you can go back to certain areas. But that's like, it's funny how that's not arbitrary. That's a design decision to force you to sort of realize where the limited play space is of the current solutions of puzzles you're dealing with. So there's a lot of really, really nuanced things that are going on in solving these sort of player psychology problems.
Yeah, that's a really good example too, because I don't know how many games I've done that in, where I just ended up going back looking for something and searching, like basically all the way back to the beginning of the game, and I'm like, how did I get back here? What the hell did I do?
I wonder, in my head, what I'm thinking now, players probably have some general senses of what they prefer, but there's probably going to be some players who much prefer a handheld or much prefer just to go it alone and get no tips at all. So in my head, I'm thinking, oh shoot, wouldn't it be cool if there was some sort of stat in the game that you could level up, and if you choose to level up, you'll get more hints, right? Maybe some perception stat or something. So as you're going through, your player might be like, I don't think it's around here. You know, if you've got that stat up. If you don't have that stat up, they'll just be like, well, I don't know. Let's go through.
There's a perfect example of this. Hollow Knight does this to a T. So the way Hollow Knight does this is when you walk around in Hollow Knight, you have no map. You have no context from room to room to room. What the hell is going on? You have to like make a mental note of whatever it is you're doing. Now, here's where it gets interesting. There is a map maker you can find in areas. And if you get the map off them, then what happens is every time you sit down somewhere, the map, he draws in the locations he's visited. So you don't get the full map. You get the like, whenever I sit down on a bench after visiting new areas, I will draw these areas on my map. And that's you visually outlining where like doors lead into conceptual unknowns. So you know you have to go back there because there's like this nebulous space somewhere. Like, oh, maybe there's something off that way. And so that's really exciting. But here's the thing. You don't know where you are on the map. There's no dot or indicator where you are on that map. So you have to keep track of the shapes of the rooms. But here's the thing that makes it extra cool. You have upgrade slots for your character that makes you more powerful. You can do like longer charges or more health or whatever. And one of them is the compass. You can put the compass into one of your slots to draw yourself on the map. So if you find yourself getting lost and you're trying to find the right like tiny corridor to move you up a thing, to drop down a thing, you have to spend some conceptual upgrade points to do that. But if you've gotten to the, and this is great because I did at the start, because I don't like getting too lost. It gets confusing. I like to kind of look around. But when you hit a certain point in the game where you've been running around the same dungeon, Metroid style, for the last 12 hours, you start to get a feel for the place. You're like, I don't need a minimap anymore. I kind of know my way around. So you can kind of, you like reclaimed that, not because the games give you an upgrade, because you feel you have personally upgraded your understanding of the space and can feel safe without needing that upgrade anymore. So it's stuff like this is really, it's exactly what you're describing. It's that sort of player freedom to engage with how much assistance they want in the game.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that game too.
I don't know where to go from here, guys.
Well, I could just talk about games forever. So this one, yeah, questions are probably better because like I could go around in circles on this one.
Yeah. Questions in the chat?
Yeah, just see if anybody's got anything.
On that answer, no, but on Nick, I haven't gotten too far into Replicant yet. I played like 5 hours or so, and this is one thing which I'm going to hands up and say it probably does get better. So one thing to note is that they do this cool thing where there's actually a trophy room in both near Automata and near Replicant, where you can actually see a wall of all of the bosses, and then as you defeat a boss, you get a trophy. And then that trophy, depending on whether you defeated them like flawlessly or not or whatever. And so I can see how much of the bosses I haven't fought yet. So I can tell I've fought like 3 out of 9 or whatever. So I have a rough sense of how much of the world there is. And so no, I haven't played very far. So I know I'm only about a third of the way through the game, if less. And I expect the story to get more interesting. But that's not going to solve all the mechanical problems I'm describing. It's entirely like literally a product of its time, and so I'm going to enjoy it more game by the end. It just won't be as good as Nier Automata.
There was one question earlier that I want to jump back to, and then maybe we just wrap it up. There's not a lot else, and that was about networking. So one of the questions that I saw pop up about networking that I didn't get a chance to click on was about building a multiplayer card game, and what type of solution you would use for that versus the other ones. So we were talking about using Photon and Mirror and a little bit about the MLAPI. And card games, I think, are a little bit different, but you certainly could use Mirror or Photon with them, but you could also use a variety of other. It's one of those few kinds of games where I feel like your options are extremely open for how you could build it or how you choose to build it. I was curious what you guys thought on that, though, or if you guys have worked on any card games or just had any thoughts about card game building and networking or just anything about it at all. In fact, like my favorite Unity game is still a card game. So the one that I play the most often is a card game. So I'm just curious what you guys think. What your thoughts are, recommendations before I jump in and start blabbing about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna just hands up defer this to you. My only understanding is that I know that Hearthstone's made in Unity, and that's a very prolific example of a card game. But other than that, I haven't played card games since back in the day of playing the Yu-Gi-Oh games. I used to play those a lot, and so since then there's not been much, and I don't really know the specific network problems with card games. So I'll defer entirely to you on this one.
Same here.
Sure, fair enough. And to be fair, like I haven't built any big card games. I've seen people build them and worked with people who did, but I haven't had the opportunity to build them myself. But I think in general they're very they're a lot more like when we were talking about UDP versus TCP and reliability of messages. With card games, there's really no unreliable messages. I mean, there might be with maybe sending an emote or something, but even there, like, there's really nothing that's unreliable. So you really want to go with a much more reliable setup. So you either need some reliable UDP or some TCP, and then you don't. I guess it's weird because you're not really worrying about bandwidth, right? The message rate is extremely slow, and you could even go with something that's completely web-based, where you're like running a web server essentially to host your game, and all of the logic is done not in Unity at all. It's done, just in regular old C# or in JavaScript. You could build your entire game server on Node. My general recommendation is stick with one language though, so that your front end team and your back end team all understand everything, and you don't have to retrain people and have them like
100%. I've seen a lot of things like high score systems that are built in PHP, and you end up like crippling your team's productivity because somebody doesn't know how to fix a particular issue until the PHP guy comes back. So if you can, 100%. And I always say this: if you're building an API that connects to your game, just use .NET Core because that's C#. It's the same kind of code. Sure, you have to learn a bit more about different stuff, but fundamentally it's the same thing. Stick with the same knowledge and code base in a team if you can do it.
Yeah, and don't just switch to a different language unless it's something you're already comfortable with, right? Like if you're already good with Node then fine, use Node, but don't like go learn Node to build your web backend if you end up going that way. But you could definitely do that. You could set up some web service. You could, I mean, theoretically, probably even build it all in AWS Lambdas if you wanted to, right? So that all your game logic ran there. I don't know
technically, it could just
necessarily
be an
how.
API. It could be completely like no state, just the way API calls. If you really, really wanted to, terrible. You probably shouldn't ever do that. But technically, yeah, anything which transmits data, like, is doable. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in this case, you just want something that keeps track of a match between two or more people and the state data there, and then takes the messages and keeps track of who should be able to send a message and who can't.
Here's a fun example. It's actually not a card game, but it kind of plays into what you're saying. There is a game called Frozen Synapse. Now, it's got 2 or 3 different variants of it. I'm talking about the original, the cool one, the one I actually liked. The original game is really, really cool. It is a top-down sort of... it's a top-down game where you manage your little army of soldiers. And what's really fun about this is you have your team and your teammate has the other team, right? And it's you play a single player game. You effectively play chess by moving your characters, and your characters do all of the soldiery things. You can like put your gun down to run faster, but then you can't respond to being caught out by enemies, or you can walk with your gun up, which walks slower, but you're now more alert. Or you can have different characters, the rocket guy versus the one guy with the AK-47 or whatever. And so the point is you're doing sort of an incursion with your team against the enemy team. And the way this game is interesting is you play both sides. So you are alone at your computer playing both sides, simulating different battle scenarios. And when there's one that you think is what the enemy is going to do and what you want to do, you lock in your moves. And the enemy is doing exactly the same thing. And then when you play both at the same time, you see if it worked out the way you expected. So you might make the assumption they're going to breach a certain door, so you focus all your guys in the door, but he might come around the other way and then shoot you in the back, and then you're screwed. And so the game plays out in these like snippets of 5 seconds increments of you like structuring 5 seconds of play and pause, then 5 seconds of play and pause. Now, the reason I bring this up is the game plays like chess in that you can actually back and forth this for weeks, because what happens is the game has a built-in email. It connects with the email server, and it also so you can play this on multiple devices. You can play it on a tablet, you can play it on PC. And so what you do is you can spend a week planning your moves, lock them in, and send it. Your teammate will get an email to say it's their turn, and then they can do the same thing, structure the thing when they're done. And then at the very, very end, the game spits out a link that you could basically post to your YouTube channel that is the whole battle. And it's so cool when you're done and you find out the entire battle lasted less than 40 seconds. But it was so tense over the last month as you've been like eking out these decisions and trying to do stuff and figure out, are they going to flank this way or that way? And I bring all of this up to say, this is exactly the kind of game where it is a networked game, but it's a networked game where it's storing game decisions in state. You could entirely make this game like with just a web API or even just a basic solution, like lambdas. And this would be a really good example of a lambda solution type game, because they can shut down and spin back up when they need to. So it really does depend on the kind of game you're making.
That's a great example, I think. You're storing the state and then basically pulling it back up every time somebody gets back in. Yeah, I like it. Nice. Somebody said stick with TCP only. Okay, well, I don't know if we had any other questions, but I think you answered that one really well, and been going for a while. So maybe we'll just wrap it up for today and then come back next week and talk some more about game development, networking, and a couple other things. I'd like to maybe I think what I'm going to do is send out a survey to everybody that's on my email list to see what types of topics they're curious about. What things
that's a good idea. Like, I would be genuinely curious, because we bounce around a lot, so I would be genuinely curious to see what people want to hear about, because I'm more than happy to talk about any of these topics. It just comes down to what people want to hear.
Same here, yeah. So I think I'll send that out. So if you're not on the list, just make sure you click the link. There's an email sign up list, and I'll send it out. We'll figure out what everybody wants to hear, and then I'll probably do like a survey on YouTube too. So make sure you're subscribed, hit thumbs up, and all that stuff. And then I'll send that out. We'll figure out what everybody wants to hear about, and we'll talk some more. I guess we'll be back on next week. I don't have a video to premiere this time, unfortunately, but sometime soon. I had a crazy week. Anyway. And also make sure that you check out Andrew's stuff it's linked down below. It's on sale until the 30th, right?
Yeah, there's 2 packs on sale. So if you go to infinitypbr.com, there's links there to the asset store. There's the big RPG character bundle is on sale right now. It's 50% off. Plus, you can get the extra 5% or 10% off. So it's basically 55% off, and it's so it's like $180 savings or something there. That's big. And then also, if you're there, check out my YouTube and Twitch, and do the whole like and subscribe thing. We're putting out a lot of hopefully interesting video content that's tips and tricks with Unity, combining assets together, and I'm also doing my own game. So I've been doing some live streaming on my intermediate level coding journey on there. So definitely check that out as well.
Nice. Yeah, and we'll put that in the description below too, along with a link to Jason's stuff that I'm going to link down there in chat as well. Everybody can go check out.
Just as one side note, I just want to address one question because it comes up a lot. So just for clarity, I don't have equipment set up. I want to make this very, very clear. I have, right here is the pod mic. I have a Shure SM7B behind me. I have Go XLRs, DACs and amps. I've got like a $3,000 Sony camera and set up with like a really expensive lens. My equipment is fine. I'm just in a particularly bad network location. So my internet connection is terrible. So if my audio sounds bad, I assure you, on my screen, my picture looks great. My audio sounds great. So I cannot fix this from a streaming perspective until I get better than the internet I have now. So unfortunately, no, I can't. I'm sorry. It's just the setup I've got.
Just gonna have to move.
I'm
gonna head over to mainland Europe. Get a better internet connection. Oh, okay. Apparently, it's my mic. Sounds bad anyway.
Well, again, you sound great to me. And yes, that is the SM7B he's using. As is I have one over there. I don't like using my SM7B because my voice is a bit high pitched and Irish, as you've probably noticed by now. And there's the benefits of the SM7B is that it handles the lower registers quite well. It gives you that nice buttery smooth pulse, and with me it muffles my voice a bit. People have a hard time understanding me with how fast I speak as it is. When I use that mic in particular, it makes things a little bit kind of boomier and mufflier, so it doesn't suit my voice, so I switch to the pod mic myself. There you go. There's a side note on audio that and another topic I quite like.
Yeah, the only issue I have with this thing is you got to be right up on it. If I get back at all like this, can't hear me anymore, and then suddenly audio sucks.
You guys should do a whole session on streaming setup. Clearly, you guys both have some knowledge there.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I'd like to do one. I want to do an office tour someday too, and just show all the equipment and some of the weird shit in the background and stuff.
Certainly, I always wonder what it looks like if you to flip the camera around. What's the other? What's the non-camera ready side?
Yeah, it's actually pretty nice. It's my favorite part. This is my favorite room in the house. Let me see. Maybe I can give you a real.
Mine is literally an empty. The second half of my room is empty except for a bin and a camera and a tripod far away. There's nothing there. It's just like everything interesting is behind me.
I'll see if I can. I'll see if this works. Let's plug this thing in and see if it lets me pop up a second camera and you can see over the over there.
Our house is tiny, so this room is the only room available. So you get everything behind me that's just day-to-day stuff.
There's a fun recommendation from a streamer called Harris Keller. He does basically recommendations for improving your stream, and he talks about using like a GoPro or a second camera to give yourself a second cinematic angle for your stream. I always thought that's a cool idea. You could do that. You could set up a camera that's a wide shot that includes your like background and stuff, and you could cut between them. It's just I don't care enough, and people can't really see my terrible quality as is. I think he's leaving to join to like. There you go. Let's bring it in. There you go.
There you go. Now, yeah, that's what it looks like over there. So there's the camera. That's what I'm staring at. That's you guys on the
by
screen.
The way, just because you need context, the big weird thing in front of his camera there, that is a teleprompter, and that's the Parrot something. Parrotcast or something.
This is the Pad one. It was the bigger one because it was in stock and able to get here on time.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
But
so
I'd
basically
rather
what
have
that
the
does,
small one because that makes my
if
camera be
you
up too high.
put
So there's the camera. There's my mess
if you
of
put
a
a
bunch of
phone or
shoes
a
and
tablet or
stuff and
something
Yoda.
sitting on that on the bottom of that, it reflects up onto the screen
Yeah.
of this mirror, and so you can look directly into the camera and see the script that you've written. So that's just a fun tip for people wondering how people do that, is that you can actually read your script on the reflected mirror while also talking directly to the camera. It's just a cool extra thing.
Or you could see the person you're talking to and actually be staring at them, which is always nice. Jason, is there was there lights at the top that were?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
nice.
hey
Ooh,
Google,
nice.
make the Death Star red.
Ooh,
Yeah,
nice.
so there's lights there, and then up on the ceiling, there's actually went with the LifeX panels so that I could do this weird stuff like let's see if this will work. Let's change the colors. I renamed it. What did I name this thing to? Oh no, it's not in here. Well, normally with that light stripping, change it and have it do animated colors all around, but I just reset everything up, and apparently I haven't re-added that one on there. You do like cool little animations and stuff. It was a lot of fun. Oh wait, there we go. It's back up. Apparently it reconnected.
I like the Mario decals up there as well.
Yeah, so there's all those, and then there's this shelf up here, and I was gonna actually move all the Mario stuff over here to the shelf to kind of match up here with this stuff, and then turn that into like a little Marvel wall. Yeah, apparently that light isn't working. I don't know why it's not syncing up. The wire's coming down through there, and yeah, I don't know. But yeah, that's essentially what it.
And he's gone.
Yeah, so unfortunately I can't do the
that's
same
that's
thing.
what it looks like though. Oh, and then that's a random other. Here, here's the other side real quick there. That's the Star Wars wall.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
So it's just I had a bunch of Star Wars stuff and popped it all up on there. Decided to make a Star Wars wall.
That's
out
a
of
cool
it.
little poster poster thing there.
Oh yeah, that I saw that. I was like, that's
Nice.
that was kind of like the first thing that started off the wall. I think the Death Star and then that thing, and then kind of randomly found other Star Warsy things. And it's like, oh, that's cool. Got to keep adding on. Yeah, that's essentially what it looks like. I'll have to do a full tour sometime though. Let everybody see some of the tech stuff and all that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have like a second handy webcam I can show my back wall. I do have some cool stuff I'd like to show off. I have like various consoles. I've got replica masks from video games. I've got tracers. Actually, I can grab Tracer's gun. That one's right here. Yeah. There's my tracer pistol. That's kind of cool. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff up there that I'd love to show off, but I just don't have a set up yet.
Smack it with my Torb hammer back there.
Yeah,
So I put
exactly.
that robot's just holding the Torb hammer that I got at GameStop.
I saw the video where you had the little animation. That was cool.
Oh yeah. That was a fun one. I saw that and it was half off, and I was like, I don't think I can resist that. I was like, yep. Oh, anyway, yeah, I guess we'll just wrap it up now, and then we'll send out the email, get a list of just things that you guys want to hear about, things you guys want to talk about or want us to talk about or teach about or share about. So make sure that you sign up for that and you're ready for that. Make sure that you hit the thumbs up button, you like and subscribe and share the video and all that stuff, and that you check out infinitypbr.com. In fact, let's pull it up real quick before we leave. Let's load that up as my last thing to share. Share one more screen because there's some really cool stuff on here. Oh, spring sale ends soon. Go click on the link. But yeah, go check out these assets. Man, this stuff is just cool. Hey, every time I see it, I just want to make an RPG. It drives me nuts.
Me too.
Like, oh yeah, I need to go make an MMO. I need to go make an RPG with goblins and orcs and be able to play as a random demon or a mushroom. Actually, use that mushroom in a couple games.
Yeah, the
And
mushroom.
from my
I love going back
perspective-
to the mushroom.
I have no interest in making RPG, but what I do love is the TV show that is watching Andrew make an RPG. 'Cause he's got his YouTube channel where he's like coding the game, and it's genuinely interesting to watch someone work on a game. So
Yeah,
I tune in from time to time.
yeah. Well, you've helped out tremendously, and you know everyone who watches you knows that you're tremendously helpful, and you've got a vast wealth of knowledge, and so it's fun. I am surprised as anyone that there'd be people aside from you who are watching and enjoying it and stick around for 3 hours talking me through problems and trying to figure out, like, just 2 days ago, I took a day off of work and I spent 2.5 hours on a stream. I'm gonna do the next step in my game. I knew there was a bug, but I was like, I can fix the bug real quick, so I'll just start by fixing the bug real quick. And I just went down a rabbit hole, and we went through all these, like, what's the issue? What's the issue? Finally, at the end, I cut the stream off, went out for had lunch, went out for a walk, came back, and it was just a simple. I used the wrong object name in the set dirty code, and I looked at that like 3 or 4 times during the stream. None of us noticed it, and I was like, oh gosh. But people stuck around for 2 hours listening and talking with me, and that's an amazing feeling. So that I'm gonna do more of those because they're
I was honestly worried that it was my fault because previously to that stream I talked you through a whole load of stuff, and when we watched the stream there was that snippet in and around serialized objects, and I'm like, did I just break his entire suite of stuff? I'm worried.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's the thing. Everything that I had changed was based on suggestions from you, and they were great changes. It's so much better now than it was before, and like, just it was all about being able to reuse some bits of the editor code that I keep repeating. And sure enough, by the way, I created a new module the other day, just a simple one, that first person movement one, and I used that code, and things just magically worked. Like when I was doing the editor code, and it was like, oh, I was expecting I would have to rework some. It just works. Okay, that's good. Anyway, but yeah, so your code was not to blame. It was just me. And I think I had actually solved that problem a week before, and somehow it got reintroduced or something. So I should have recognized it, but what can you do?
That's why you got to step away for a second. That's usually the fix.
Yeah,
you get stuck too long. Quick walk or shower or something.
Rubber ducky.
Yeah. So everybody that isn't already subscribed should probably click over to the Infinity PBR channel and go subscribe.
Yeah. Help us make 1,000.
YouTube streams here, yeah. So he streams on YouTube here on Infinity PBR. So if you subscribe and click the bell with the extra icon, you'll get notifications when he's streaming.
Yeah, definitely recommend it. Oh, and hit the like button.
Yeah. Always a good thing. And honestly, for me, we're just starting out with this channel. We're doing a lot of different types of videos, and we're seeing which ones are people actually watching, which ones are people responding to. There's a lot of different things. So Jim, the guy who did like the player setup video there, he used to do the videos for Bolt before Unity bought Bolt. He does amazing videos. So certainly, like, his are far more exciting than mine. But we're trying to see what people like. And so if you do go to the channel and you do click around, like the ones that you actually like. Maybe if you don't actually like something, don't like it. Just for now, later do like, but just so
leave a comment that you don't
dislike it. Just don't like it. Make sure that's clear. Just
as you say, you leave a comment.
Yeah, don't dislike.
Not my favorite.
But and leaving the comment, because we're gonna do more of that, and on our Discord, people are telling us what they want to do, and so we've got a whole bunch on the roadmap. But more and more videos are going to be coming, and we want to do what people want to see, basically. So.
Nice. And to be honest, that's what I really love about
everybody.
I was going to say one last thing is that's what I really love about the Unity YouTube space is there's so much videos that are vastly different, because you've got Andrew's video showing you him making an MMO game, and then you've got Jason talking through the code of larger scale games, these podcasts we're doing. But there's other channels too out there, like Thousand on the businessy side of games, because he's used to work at Unity and he talks about all of that stuff and how do you think about enterprise, and even how do you think about YouTube channel as an actual part of your process. And there's tons of other different creators that are like, Dapper Dino was basically going on an adventure to learn complicated topics like networking, and you can follow along on that. And then you've got like Blackthorn Prod, who's like making courses, and he's showing you the courses he's making and the content he makes. So every Unity YouTuber is doing slightly different things, and it's fascinating. There's so much content out there that's fun to consume. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely a ton of it. I'd like to get a bunch of those guys to hop on here too and just chat with us. It'd be fun. As many as possible. But again, yeah, I just want to say thanks everybody for coming out and watching and joining us. Make sure that you like, subscribe, share, and all that stuff, and check all the links in the description. Go see all the stuff. And yeah, thanks again. Thanks, Jason and Andrew. And I guess we'll see you again on next Sunday.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Good luck.
Bye, everybody.
I'm gonna go play some more Nier.